Chapter 942. An old man as thin as a match squatted at the top of the Supreme Tower, his eyes gleaming with a green light, squinting at the corpses of Great Wu's soldiers all over the ground. "You've done a good job, you little bastards. These fools are useless. How dare they provoke New Yu with such little strength?" The old man's voice was hoarse and gruesome, unpleasant to the ear. Wu Dihao felt a burning sensation in his lower abdomen, and he barely clamped his legs together to prevent himself from peeing on the spot. He stared in horror at the old man squatting at the top of the Supreme Tower, and an instinctive sense of despair and fear almost made him pass out. This was the instinctive feeling of a lower-grade living being toward a superior enemy. As soon as Wu Dihao saw the old man, he knew that he could easily crush him with a finger. Wu Dihao did not have such a feeling in front of Great Wu's original supreme oracles. It was said that those great oracles had the same overall strength as the supreme oracles on Panga continent, but when Wu Dihao saw a real supreme oracle with his own eyes, he realized that it was nonsense. Even if 10 of Great Wu's supreme oracles joined forces, they would not necessarily be able to defeat a real supreme oracle. Wu Dihao's instinct told him that if these supreme oracles from outer heavenly realms met this old man, they would only be lambs to be slaughtered. "Retreat! Retreat!" Wu Dihao howled hoarsely. Ignoring his son who was hanging on the flagpole on the city wall, he slapped his green-scaled wildebeest's rump and urged it to leap into a blue cloud and retreat to the rear. Behind them were hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and MOD, the imperial advisor, was in charge. Wu Dihao suddenly missed MOD's rigid face so much that he wished he could hide under MOD's wings and shiver. Maybe the imperial advisor can defeat this terrible old man? Wu Dihao suddenly felt that some of the little thoughts in his mind were so stupid that they were ridiculous. He had extinguished all fighting spirit now. His intuition told him that only the 3 imperial advisors, who called themselves Slaughter and Wolf, could lead Great Wu to the peak. He could not, Wu Tianming could not, and no one in Great Wu's imperial court could not. This supreme oracle in front of him had the strength to disintegrate the whole Great Wu. Since you're already here, why run?" The old man squatting on top of the Tower of Babel lowered his head and said to the guards standing solemnly in the military town, "Little guys, you've done well. The 100-men lieutenant guarding this place will be promoted to 1,000-men lieutenant. There will be an official document sent later to expand this military town by 10 times, heh." With a flick of his sleeve, several heads flew toward the fleeing Wu Dihao with a whistling sound. Their heads were dripping with blood, grimacing in pain as they died with their eyes wide open. They were the unlucky ones who had led the charge and were teleported to the front of Yuxiong City. It was because of their unexpected appearance that the Emperor of New Yu, who presided over the city of Yuxiong, had sent Suiren Feng, the supreme oracle of Suiren clan, to find out what was going on here. Wu Dihao, who was running fast on his green-scaled horned horse, was hit by the heads, which exploded into 7 or 8 clumps of blood behind him. The sticky blood with wisps of fire stuck to his back and made his flesh crackle as it burned. Wu Dihao howled in pain. He lay prone on his horse for a while, but the pain was so great that his internal organs were twitching and oily because of the strange fire. Unable to bear the terrible pain, he fell off the back of his mount, twitching all over. The oracles who followed him were not in the mood to rescue him. Instead, they sped away on gusts of chilly wind toward the military camp in the distance. Behind them, the Supreme Tower of Babel was approaching silently. Laughing strangely, Suiren Feng said, Interesting. How dare you abandon your commander and flee? In New Yu, doing so is a crime punishable by the death of your entire clan." With a wave of his hand, a huge hand condensed from flames grabbed toward Wu Dihao. Suiren Feng looked carelessly into the distance. Just a dozen miles away, the military camp under MOD's command could be seen clearly. The murderous aura emanating from the drill of hundreds of thousands of soldiers towered into the sky and turned into a dense cloud of black smoke. Amidst the thick black smoke, a bear could be vaguely seen lying down. It was an army of elite soldiers. Suiren Feng looked at the bear in surprise, then quickly sent his divine sense into the camp. If all these elite soldiers had the overall strength of New Yu soldiers, It would be a big blow to Nuyu. But the feedback from his divine sense made him breathe a sigh of relief. These soldiers' murderous aura, killing intent, and courage were top-notch, but their cultivation bases were still inferior to Nuyu's soldiers. Useless chickens and stray dogs. Laughing evilly, Swearin Feng grabbed Wu Dihao with a huge hand of fire and burned his skin and flesh. Sparkling, translucent yellow human oil slowly dripped out of his body. It was Swearin Feng's favorite, human withering fire, which was specially used to torture people. It could burn out all the oil and water in a human body, but still keep the person alive. It was a very cruel and vicious evil art. Wu Dihao's internal organs felt as if they were being boiled in hot oil. He opened his mouth and tried to cry for help, but all his cries turned into wisps of water vapor. Swearin Feng trembled with excitement. He gritted his teeth and continued to train Wu Dihao's body, slowly extracting the oil and water drop by drop. Wu Dihao was the only one here, but there were hundreds of thousands of soldiers waiting for him in the distance. The Emperor of Nuyu had only sent him out to find out the details of the military situation, but he could still be considered meritorious if he destroyed an army. At the thought of the spectacular scene of hundreds of thousands of people being turned into a lake of oil by him, Swearin Feng felt refreshed. With so much human oil, the extremely evil mystic art he was cultivating, which was strictly forbidden in Dayu's Directorate of Celestials, should be able to be upgraded to a higher level, right? Perhaps his cultivation base could be upgraded to a higher level. Just as Swearin Feng threw his head back and laughed excitedly, a furious roar rang out of the void. Abandoning your commander and fleeing in the face of battle is a crime worthy of death. The three imperial advisors of Great Wu, Wu Qi, Gigu Zi, and Mod, flew down from the sky. A white sword beam shot out of Wu Qi's hand and cut down the dozens of fleeing oracles who had abandoned Wu Dihao. Wu Dihao, who was badly burned by the human withering fire, growled hoarsely, "Well done. Damn you. Help me, imperial advisors. I'm willing to be your disciple, and I have no other thoughts." Wu Qi arched an eyebrow. Sure enough, this guy has other thoughts. TSK, judging by your fat and strong appearance, it doesn't matter if you lose some oil. I'm not in a hurry to save you. Just consider it the price you have to pay for your little trick. Glancing sideways at Wu Dihao, who was struggling in the flaming hand, Wu Qi cupped his fist at Swearin Feng and said proudly, "Fellow Taoist, please release my imperial uncle." Swearin Feng snorted coldly and did not even bother to look at Wu Qi and his companions. They were just 3 peak-level gold immortals, not worthy of his attention at all. However, it was better to be safe than sorry. Swearin Feng activated the defensive mechanism on the Supreme Tower, which emitted a beam of strong black light that enveloped him. With that, Wu Qi and his companions could no longer hurt him with surprise attacks. The oracles of Dayu were not like those fake supreme oracles of Great Wu who had their eyes on their foreheads. Any oracle of Dayu would properly protect himself before a battle, never giving the enemy any chance to take advantage of him. Wu Dihao cried out again, "Help me, imperial advisor. I'm willing to be your disciple and listen to your teachings day and night." As an adult, he burst into tears. The shadow of death was pressing down on his heart, and the boundless fear had completely broken him down. All he wanted now was to stay alive, and he could not care about anything else. What were things like face and dignity worth in the face of his life? Wuji smiled. This time, he could finally see what Dayu's supreme oracle was capable of. Swearin Feng did not take the 3 of them seriously, and Wu Qi did not want to waste time talking to him. Seeing that Wu Dihao was really about to collapse, Wu Qi let out a long roar. The sword on his back flew out, turned into 3 beams of sword energy that looked like white dragons, and slashed down at Swearin Feng's head. Gigu Zi murmured an incantation while holding the peachwood sword and circulating his energy above the cloud. His incantation sounded like the sound waves of countless locusts, gradually sweeping across the surrounding mountains and rivers. A muffled rumble rang out, and at the same time, thick earthen mist sprayed out of the mountains visible to the naked eye. Following the direction Gigu Zi's peachwood sword pointed at, the mist turned into dozens of huge yellow airwaves that slapped down at Swearin Feng's head. Mod, on the other hand, simply flicked his sleeve. A giant metal puppet, about 1,000 feet tall and shining with a dazzling light, swung its huge fist at Fang's supreme tower. Fang laughed, shook his head, and sighed. It's just a small trick. Fang could not hang on any longer. Wu Qi's sword energy tore through Fang's protective black light and brushed past his face. One of Fang's ears was cut off by Wu Qi, and a pale green liquid slowly gushed out of the wound. Before Fang could come up with a countermeasure, the spiritual energy of the earth veins Gigu Zi had channeled turned into 12 huge Dingjia talismans and landed lightly on the supreme tower. A deafening rumble rang out, and the light barrier around Fang's supreme tower fluctuated violently. He could not even control the tower at will. Fang cried out in horror. The power Wu Qi and his companions used was definitely at the level of gold immortals, but their attacks were so exquisite that they seemed to have targeted all the flaws in Fang's defensive barrier. It was as if a slight move would cause a chain reaction. With the magic power of gold immortals, they had broken through Fang's supreme primordial defensive barrier. Before Fang could figure out what was going on, Mod's metal puppet had already punched the supreme tower. With a loud clang, the supreme tower was knocked flying away. Fang hovered alone in midair, staring dumbfoundedly at Wu Qi and his companions, who had approached him. Wu Qi grabbed Fang's skinny neck with one hand and put the flying sword against his neck. Now we can have a good talk. When Wu Qi said those words, his gesture was not like that of a true immortal, but more like that of a gangster collecting protection fees on the street. Fang's eyes flickered with a sinister light. He was about to teach Wu Qi a lesson when the sharp pain in his groin made him forget all the incantations in an instant. Wu Qi struck Fang's groin with his knee, turning him into a docile captive. Chapter 943. From the mouth of Fang, who was captured alive, Great Wu's emperor and courtiers finally understood what a colossus they were facing. Even though Nuyu, which had split from Diyu, was less than half as strong as Diyu, it was a terrible existence that the human kingdoms in outer heavenly realms could not deal with. After all, Diyu was a great power that had fought alone against the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League for countless years. On the other hand, human kingdoms like Great Wu were just insignificant existences in outer heavenly realms, and everything they had was controlled by the immortal sects, large and small. Those immortal sects, on the other hand, were just insignificant pawns under the control of the Celestial Court, and they could not even be considered as the peripheral power of the Celestial Court. Finally understanding the gap between Great Wu and Nuyu, at Wu Qi's suggestion, Great Wu gave up and retreated as quickly as they had come. All the people of human kingdoms along the way were forced to migrate further south. Great Wu gave up the northern expedition and shifted its focus to the east and west. There were more human kingdoms from outer heavenly realms there, and he could defeat the armies of those kingdoms and abduct their people to develop Great Wu's own army. According to Wu Qi's strategy, if Great Wu could conquer more than 30% of the human kingdoms in outer heavenly realms, it would at least have the power to protect itself from the attack of Diyu and Nuyu. Under the powerful deterrent of Nuyu, the whole of Great Wu began to move according to Wu Qi's will. Expand the army, expand the army, expand the army, advance, advance. Great Wu began to deploy troops to the east and west at the same time, like a ferocious monster that was growing larger and larger, devouring the human kingdoms that were also from outer heavenly realms. At the same time, at the border of the eastern region controlled by Dong Hai, Princess Zhonglu was inspecting the military towns and cities surrounded by a large group of people. Over the past few months, there had always been some conflicts, big and small. Sometimes the East Sea Army killed the enemy with ease, but sometimes it was the East Sea Army that suffered a little loss. On such a long border, at least 1,000 conflicts broke out every day, and more than 2,000 soldiers of the East Sea had died in the conflicts. It was not a good sign. Wu Qi could send intelligence back to the East Sea at any time, so the East Sea had a good understanding of the situation in outer heavenly realms. It was impossible for those small human kingdoms in outer heavenly realms to pose any threat to the East Sea. Take Great Wu for example. Could it cause any real damage to Nuyu? But now, it was true that the East Sea was losing soldiers. This could only prove that outside the area controlled by the East Sea Army, in the boundless far east of Penghu continent, a new power had emerged, and this power was strong enough to pose a certain threat to the East Sea. Perhaps other powerful forces had intervened. They had the strength and courage to keep probing the East Sea. The Celestial Court had promised not to take the initiative to attack the East Sea, but in addition to the Celestial Court, there was also the Behemoth Buddhist League. Furthermore, even the heavens didn't know how reliable the Heavenly Court's guarantee was. Who could guarantee that it was not some conspiracy of the Celestial Court? On the wall of a military town garrisoned with 3,000 soldiers, Princess Zhongli looked to the east. It was a vast grassland with a wide expanse of flat land. Less than 100 miles away, a city that had been built just 2 months ago was in sight. It was so large that it could accommodate millions of residents. Now, a large group of people was opening up fields and building houses around the city, as if they were going to build a cluster of villages and towns around the city. Within the coverage of Princess Zhongli's divine will, within a radius of several thousand miles, tens of millions of people were bustling about. On the west gate of the city, a huge flag was hung on a very tall flagpole. Not to mention Princess Zhongli, even the soldiers with higher cultivation base in the military town could see the huge flag on the 3 miles tall flagpole, which had a huge purple character, Spirit, written on it. The flagpole was 3 miles tall, and it looked so arrogant and domineering. It was very similar to the watchtower that Wu Qi had built outside the Liu Bang's gate years ago. Obviously, the huge character, Spirit, was written by a great master. It was written in a lively and powerful style, like a huge dragon hovering over the flag, giving off an insufferably arrogant and threatening aura. Spirit. Princess Zhongli frowned and asked, "Is there any information about which human kingdom this represents?" Yen Bugui shook his head. Over the past 2 months, he had lost thousands of spies, a greater loss than the soldiers who died in the battles in the border military towns. For some unknown reason, the Far East region, which was once like a sieve that allowed the spies of the East Sea to come and go freely, had now become a dangerous trap. Once the spies of the East Sea entered the place, they would immediately disappear without a trace. It was as if there was a spy agency that was as strong and efficient as Yen Bugui's, and it was also a professional organization that was attacking Yen Bugui's subordinates in the dark. Under the observation of all the civil and military officials of the East Sea, especially the patriarchs of Great Yan's imperial clan, such as Yen Dan and Yen Bugui's face turned red, and he bowed his head embarrassedly. Like Yen Bugui, among all the civil and military officials of the East Sea, Li Si, Su Qin, Zhang Yi, and Su Fu also bowed their heads awkwardly and stared at the tips of their feet. After the 6 dynasties formed the East Sea Alliance, these 4 civil officials, who had dark and twisted characters and used cruel and vicious means, were also thrown into the spy system of the East Sea by Wu Qi. Yen Bugui was only responsible for the overall situation, while the 4 of them were each in charge of a branch. Although Yen Bugui had lost a lot of face with the severe loss of spies of the East Sea, the 4 of them, who were in charge of the specific work, did not seem to feel any better. Taking advantage of his seniority, Huang Xie laughed and said, how can we be careless when it comes to military intelligence? If, your strength is not enough, this old man can also reluctantly share the burden for you." Because of what had happened to Yu Ji and the other 2 women, Huang Xie was a little isolated. Apart from his own group of trusted subordinates, even the civil and military officials of Chu State did not want to talk to him. Not to mention the military officials of Chu State, each and every one of them from Xiang Yu's side was a man who dared to love and hate, and none of them liked Huang Xie, who was cold and heartless. As for the civil officials of Chu State, with Chu Ping, a romantic and affectionate emperor, how could they have anything in common with Huang Xie? Therefore, Huang Xie had been a little irritable lately, and his words were full of sarcasm. Su Fu snorted coldly. As he narrowed his eyes and was about to argue with Huang Xie, a sonorous dragon roar suddenly came from the sky above the city in the distance. Everyone was startled, and they turned to look in that direction at the same time. They saw a 5-clawed golden dragon, its body glinting with a golden light as it flew toward them, bringing with it a large cloud. Riding on the back of the golden dragon was a middle-aged man in a purple robe. He had a jade-like complexion and an excellent bearing. 8 captains in purple armors, with only half of their faces exposed, were flying closely behind the man. The captains of the East Sea took a step forward at the same time, looking at the 8 captains with excitement and fear. 8 captains with the cultivation base of the human race in the 3rd Pangu heaven had reached the realm of primordial by practicing the cultivation technique of the human race. In the East Sea, Wu Qi had only about a dozen captains who practiced the cultivation technique of the human race, including Huang Liang. But now, there were 8 of them around this man. Ao Buzan had his arm around immortal Jadebone's slender waist, and his big hand was sneakily stroking her buttocks. When he saw the mighty golden dragon baring his fangs and brandishing his claws, he could not help but snort coldly and say, "How dare you be so presumptuous in front of Lao Tzu, my grandson?" A deep, strange howl came out of Ao Buzan's mouth. The mighty golden dragon suddenly twitched and fell from the sky like a heavy stone. Fortunately, the purple-robed man on his back reacted quickly. A cloud drifted out from under his feet and caught him firmly. On top of the city wall, Ao Buzan, Yuan Qing, and the others, who were not very kind, were laughing. Chi-Chi was laughing, and Catfish was convulsing with laughter. Almost instinctively, she showed half of her catfish head, saliva dripping from the corners of her mouth. Clearly, she was very hungry for the fallen golden dragon. The purple-robed man had been tricked by Ao Buzan, but he just smiled and flew toward them. When he was about 1,000 feet away from the city wall, he cupped his fist and bowed to Princess Zhang Lu, who was surrounded by the crowd. "I am Zhang Tingyun, the Spirit Emperor. May I ask your name, my lady? Are you married?" As soon as he said that, Princess Zhang Li's expression changed abruptly. She snorted coldly and uttered a strange incantation. Frowning slightly, Zhang Tingyun chuckled and said in a low voice, "What a hot-tempered beauty! It just so happens that there is a lack of an empress in my palace, and you are the best candidate." A strange ghost howl rang out. Suddenly, a grayish-white shadow emanating an evil aura emerged around Zhang Tingyun. The ghost had no shape, but the aura emanating from it could freeze one's blood. It was frantically tearing at Zhang Tingyun's body, and the sharp howl seemed to tear his soul to pieces. A white and flawless lotus flower, about 10 feet in circumference, slowly flew out from the top of Zhang Tingyun's head, emitting a jade-like immortal light that illuminated the surroundings. As the immortal light shone on the shadow, the ferocious ghost summoned by Princess Zhang Lu let out a despairing shriek, then turned into a wisp of black smoke and drifted away. Frowning, Zhang Tingyun scolded Princess Zhang Lu, "You will be the future master of the 9 palaces of the Ling dynasty, so you can't be so cruel. Come back with me now, and I'll teach you how to be the mother of the world and the holy mother of the human race." Ao Buzan burst into wild laughter. Pointing a finger at Zhang Tingyun, he said, "Where did this crazy guy come from? Who does he think he is? Brothers, he doesn't take us seriously at all. How dare he rob our man right in front of us?" Without saying a word, Lord Xiansheng pulled out the illusion-breaking halberd and thrust it at Zhang Tingyun. Zhang Tingyun's face turned cold as he snorted softly. A general next to him took a step to the side and appeared in front of Zhang Tingyun. A golden round shield appeared out of thin air in front of this general. The round shield emitted a dazzling light like the sun and collided with the void-splitting halberd. A muffled thud rang out as Lord Xiansheng withdrew the halberd and stood proudly. A palm-sized crack appeared in the middle of the shield, and the body of the general who blocked Lord Xiansheng swayed. Suddenly, the armor near his heart cracked open, and blood sprayed out of the gap. Zhang Tingyun was startled. Suddenly, a purple slit opened between his brows, and a glinting purple vertical eye opened and gave the crowd on the wall a glance. With a shudder, the white lotus above his head suddenly emitted a dazzling light, and in the next moment, the group of people disappeared without a trace. "Ling Dynasty?" Princess Zhang Li's cold voice rang out. "Assemble the army, destroy the dynasty, and slaughter the members of its imperial clan." Chapter 944. Half a year away from the border controlled by the East Sea, using the speed of ordinary golden immortals as the standard, there was a newly built city called Myriad Spirit. This was a magnificent city that even Liangzhu City paled in comparison. It was incomparably large in scale, and could only be designed by an absolute madman or a top-grade genius. Starting from the foot of the mountain, every 1 mile higher, a wide platform would be dug out from the mountain, and the city would be built on these huge platforms that were shaped like steps. The city would be built on top of these huge platforms that were hundreds of miles tall and thousands of miles in circumference. The city was densely covered with statues of dragons, phoenixes, cheilants, and all kinds of spirit creatures between heaven and earth. All the buildings in the city were extremely exquisite and luxurious, and all the palaces and pavilions were made of fine gold and jade. The walls were made of fine gold, the tiles were made of fine jade, and the streets and courtyards were paved with all kinds of colorful stones. Together with the countless exotic flowers and plants in the city, the whole city looked like a huge garden. There was a large lake at the top of the mountain. It was originally a pool of clear water, but now it had turned into a lake of fine wine. The bright red wine, with a faint fragrance of grapes, flowed out of dozens of holes, and turned into dozens of waterfalls and rivers that ran through the city along the specially dug channels. Inside the city, thousands of fountains of various sizes spurted out fragrant wine or pure milk. The entire city was filled with an exotic fragrance that could captivate one's soul. None of the residents in the city were old or ugly. They were all strong young men or beautiful girls in their prime. Each of them was full of energy, and when they walked, they were accompanied by clouds. Each of them had a cultivation base of at least a high-tier heaven immortal. But, in the city, these 9th-tier heaven immortals were nothing but servants. Clad in dazzling armors of gold, purple, silver, green, blue, red, and many other colors, tall and strong warriors patrolled the city with rumbling footsteps. Tens of millions of formidable warriors were guarding the magnificent city, which was unprecedented on Pangu continent, and all enemies would be mercilessly attacked by them. The 108 Supreme Towers were 90% similar in shape to Diyu's, except that they had a magnificent, pure gold luster and were carved with countless patterns of dragons and phoenixes, making them as luxurious as the city of Wanling. At the top of every sky-reaching tower, there was a high priest sitting cross-legged. However, these high priests were all tall and strong. Their long white beards were meticulously groomed, and each strand was draped smoothly in front of their chests. Compared to the priests of Diyu, these priests all looked better. The priests of Diyu were like the moldy potatoes stored in the ground in winter, while these priests were like the rosy and fragrant apples on the fruit trees in autumn. At the peak of the mountain, in the center of the wine lake, a majestic palace made of translucent white jade floated quietly on the wine. A large group of beautiful girls in extremely thin clothes were frolicking on the veranda near the water. From time to time, some girls would be pushed into the wine lake by their companions, struggling to move up and down in the wine lake. Not long after, they had drunk too much wine and were all red. Then, the girls who were stomping their feet and laughing on the veranda would pick up these drunk girls, wipe them clean with white silk, and carry them to a parlor surrounded by flowers in the heart of the palace. The parlor was covered with thick, soft, and gorgeous cushions. A dozen or so drunk girls were lying on the cushions. Between their legs were mottled blood and some unknown red and white liquid. Zhang Tingyun was lying on top of a girl, his eyes blurred as he stared at a bright red rose near him, his body heaving up and down vigorously. This was the city of Wanling. This was the palace of Wanling. This was the ruling core of the Ling dynasty. The Ling dynasty was a human kingdom in outer heavenly realms that was unknown to many, but had a very strong latent power. Zhang Tingyun was the current emperor of the Ling dynasty, and only he knew how strong the Ling dynasty was. Putting everything else aside, there were more than 10,000 gold immortals worshipped by the Ling dynasty alone. These gold immortals came from more than 400 immortal sects with strong latent power in outer heavenly realms, and most of them were backed by primordial experts. The leaders of these immortal sects were the in-name disciples, outer disciples, or even personal disciples of those primordial experts. Of the 10,000 gold immortals, only 300 were allowed to enter the 9 heavens to listen to their lectures. The Ling dynasty controlled millions of outer heavenly realms, and countless people were at his mercy. Billions of mighty warriors could shatter the stars with a single order from him. Wherever his imperial edicts went, even the heavenly lords and immortal lords of the celestial court had to kneel and listen to them, trembling with fear. Only the core ministers of the celestial court who held high positions were qualified to sit on equal footing with him. Other than that, when Zhang Tingyun was born, he was born with a pure jade white lotus. This pure jade white lotus was a grand mist treasure artifact. Even though it had no offensive capabilities, its defensive capabilities were outstanding, and it was said that a single lotus could protect the body from all kinds of evil. Even the curse unleashed by Princess Zhanglu out of anger could do nothing to Zhang Tingyun, which showed how strong the white jade lotus was. In addition, when Zhang Tingyun was a child, he was taken in as an unnamed disciple by a nameless wandering Taoist. Zhang Tingyun's aptitude was excellent, and the Taoist had spent a great deal of effort to cultivate him. In just 100 years, Zhang Tingyun had stepped into the peak of the first-tier primordial immortal realm from immortal. If word of his cultivation speed were to spread, it would scare all the immortals who had been working hard for eons and were still in the realm of gold immortals. To reach the peak of the primordial immortal realm within 100 years, it was rare to see such a genius even among the human race who were known for their cultivation speed. The Taoist had even given Zhang Tingyun many defensive treasures, among which there were many powerful treasures such as chaotic spirit treasures and innate spirit artifacts. There were also treasures such as the cosmic natal star medallion, which did not have any offensive or defensive abilities, but could summon 84,000 celestial lords and extract their natal star power for his own use. With this medallion, Zhang Tingyun had once visited the Fiend realm and had an exchange with many Fiend emperors and Fiend saints. At that time, he had borrowed the natal star power of the 7 Northern Dipper celestial lords and concentrated it on himself. Together with his peak first-tier primordial immortal strength, he had defeated all the almighty experts in the Fiend realm, including those who had existed since the creation of heaven and earth. As a result, they had sent a large number of Fiend immortals to join the Ling dynasty, forming the terrifying army known as the Myriad Fiend Battalion of the Ling dynasty. Just one cosmic natal star medallion was already so powerful, not to mention the many other treasures he had. After that, everything went smoothly. Zhang Tingyun returned from the Fiend realm with glory, and his father was killed by a powerful demon during a hunting trip. Zhang Tingyun defeated many of his brothers and ascended to the throne of the Ling dynasty. On the day he ascended the throne, it rained flowers, and auspicious clouds lingered around the capital of the Ling dynasty for 3 days. The 6 great celestial emperors of the celestial court issued an edict at the same time, stating that all the immortals of the celestial court serving in the 33 heavens, except for the core ministers of the celestial court, must obey Zhang Tingyun's edict unconditionally. Compared to Zhang Tingyun, what was the so-called heaven's favored son and the love of all? In short, since Zhang Tingyun was born, everything had gone smoothly for him. There was nothing he could not get, and there was nothing he could not do. Even the dozen or so favored concubines that his late imperial father had taken in for less than 3 years, when he, Zhang Tingyun, used violence to take these favored concubines as his personal favorites, didn't all the civil and military officials praise him, Zhang Tingyun, for being unparalleled in filial piety? This time, the Ling dynasty had responded to the call of the celestial court, leading countless people and hundreds of armies to Pangu continent along with hundreds of outer heavenly realms. It only took a few months for the Ling dynasty to bring all the kingdoms of the human race that had arrived in the eastern region of Diyu under its rule. Zhang Tingyun immediately set his eyes on his neighbor in the west. It was said that an important minister of the decadent dynasty called Diyu was stationed in the western East Sea. That man seemed to be the king of East Sea. It was also said that he had some tricks up his sleeves. Today, Zhang Tingyun suddenly brought 8 of his trusted generals to a military town newly built by the Ling dynasty on the western border for a private visit. As a result, he saw Princess Zhanglu standing in a military town on the East Sea 100 miles away, gazing at his city. Zhang Tingyun, who had seen countless women, was completely attracted by the mysterious, noble and inviolable temperament of Princess Zhang Lu. Like a mountaineering enthusiast who had seen a brand new mountain appear in front of him, Zhang Tingyun almost instinctively wanted to dominate Princess Zhang Lu and completely crush her mysterious, noble and inviolable temperament, just like all the women in the Ling dynasty who wanted anything from him. The problem was that Zhang Tingyun, who thought highly of himself, had never dreamed that Princess Zhang Lu would have so many experts around her, and it never occurred to him that Princess Zhang Lu was an existence with a cultivation base that was even more terrifying than his own. Initially, he wanted to take Princess Zhang Lu back to Wanling City by force, but when Princess Zhang Lu struck, he was shocked, for even the pure jade lotus was shaken by Princess Zhang Li's curse. When Lord Xiansheng struck, the people around Princess Zhang Lu inadvertently leaked a trace of their aura, and Zhang Tingyun immediately spun and fled. Damn it! Thinking of how he had to flee in a panic, Zhang Tingyun grabbed the neck of the girl under him and squeezed it hard. The girl's body twitched violently, and Zhang Tingyun laughed with a ferocious sneer on his face. The girl's body gradually turned cold, and a wisp of her soul slowly flew out of her body. Zhang Tingyun grinned hideously and grabbed the girl's soul in his hand, then slowly refined her soul bit by bit with a wisp of extremely thin purple flame. The mournful wails of the souls were so pleasing to his ears, so intoxicating. It was just like when he immediately killed all his brothers and brought all his sisters into the palace after he ascended to the throne. The screams, wails, and cries of pain were so intoxicating. Zhang Tingyun trembled violently. He could not control himself, and his lower body was leaking out like water, while his mind went blank. A faint purple mist rushed out from the surrounding flower beds and enveloped the parlor. The laughter of the girls around him seemed to come from another world, and he could not hear them clearly no matter how hard he tried. A strange restrictive spell had imprisoned the whole parlor. Zhang Tingyun shuddered and sprung to his feet. He glanced around in surprise. Then the white jade lotus flew up with an immortal light and shielded him. Zhang Tingyun shouted sternly, "Who is so bold?" Slowly, Lu Bang walked out of the purple mist. With a smile on his face, he cupped his fist and bowed to Zhang Tingyun. Lu Bang, the king of Han, the prime minister of the Ling dynasty, offers greetings, Your Majesty. As Lu Bang's laughter rang out, the expressionless crown prince of the celestial court, Lord Boyong, and Lu Bui walked slowly out of the purple mist. Zhang Tingyun was stunned to find that Lord Boyong looked exactly like him. Chapter 945. The Prime Minister, Lu Bang? The King of Han, Lu Bang? With his hands clasped behind his back, Zhang Tingyun frowned as he looked at Lu Bang, whose face was filled with a smile. Today, Lu Bang gave off a very strange feeling, as if the mask on his face had been torn off, revealing a very strange face. He was still the same person, but his aura had become very strange. As for Lu Bui, he stood behind Lu Bang with a smile on his face, his eyes darting back and forth between the young girls lying on the ground. From time to time, he would click his tongue in admiration, as if he could not wait to indulge these young girls who were as tender as lambs. Prime Minister? King of Han? Zhang Tingyun twitched his lips and said, "Is there a prime minister in the Ling dynasty? Is there a title of nobility in the King of Han?" Smiling happily, Lu Bang spread his arms and said, "There was no such title in the past, but now there is." Zhang Tingyun flew into a rage. A 3-feet-long bronze dagger axe emerged from his side, whistling through the air and piercing toward Lu Bang's heart with a 10-feet-long beam of bright green light. The dagger axe was strangely shaped, and its whole body was engraved with scenes of ancient people offering sacrifices to the heavens. As soon as it was unleashed, a ferocious aura that made one's heart palpitate came rushing at Lu Bang, as if a prehistoric beast had opened its mouth wide and was about to bite at Lu Bang. Soundlessly, a white lotus appeared in front of Lu Bang. Before the bronze dagger axe could get close to Lu Bang's heart, an immortal light burst out from the white lotus, and the dagger axe disappeared without a trace. Zhang Tingyun was stunned. He was shocked to find that the white lotus looked so familiar. Hastily, he raised his head and saw that the supreme treasure of Primal, the white jade lotus, was gone. Zhang Tingyun's body trembled as a chill rushed from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. It was as if he had been struck by 10,000 lightning bolts. He suddenly understood something. Lu Bang gently stroked the white lotus and said gently, "Your Majesty, don't panic. I have no evil intentions towards you." His Majesty was the destined sacred emperor of the human race. Who would dare to be rude to His Majesty? Who dares to hurt His Majesty? Pursing his lips into a smile, Lu Bang bowed deeply to Zhang Tingyun and said, "As for my background, there was no prime minister in the Ling dynasty, but now there is one. The Ling dynasty did not have the title of King of Han in the past, but it did now. In addition, the name of the old man behind me is Lu Bui. He has the talent to rule the world and is a rare pillar of the state. Therefore, he will be appointed as the imperial court judge of the Ling dynasty, in charge of all the government affairs of the Ling dynasty." Zhang Tingyun was so angry that his face turned green, and the ominous chill in his heart made his face turn pale. His face changed between green and white in an instant, and his body trembled slightly. He did not know whether he was afraid or angry, but his body was trembling uncontrollably, especially when he saw Lord Boyong, who looked exactly like him, and the white lotus floating in front of Lu Bang. Zhang Tingyun's vision went black, and cold sweat kept breaking out all over his body. Pointing a trembling finger at Lu Bang, Zhang Tingyun gnashed his teeth and said, "Without my decree, don't even think about becoming the prime minister or the imperial court judge." Standing behind Lu Bang, Lord Boyong took a slow step forward. Lord Boyong, who claimed to be born with an incomplete soul and had always been a little simple-minded, raised his chin at Zhang Tingyun and said dryly, "I don't need your consent or decree. I'm the one who decides all these things, and I'll announce my decree to the world." Silently, a triangular pagoda glinting with a green light appeared over Zhang Tingyun's head. The pagoda emitted a strange light of red, white, and blue, with arcs of light swirling like scissors amidst the light. With a murderous intent, it slashed down at Lord Boyang's head. The pagoda was also a treasure given to Zhang Tingyun by the nameless Taoist who had taken him as his in-name disciple. It was a chaotic spirit artifact, and it had the power to kill all physical things. Lord Boyong looked at the pagoda with delight. He nodded repeatedly and said, "It's a good treasure, just what I want. I'll use it often in the future." At his fingertip, the triangular light emitted by the pagoda condensed, and then all the light rushed back into the pagoda with a loud rumble like the ebbing tide. The pagoda, which was only the size of a human head, left Zhang Tingyun's body in a beam of light and floated quietly in front of Lord Boyong like an obedient kitten. Zhang Tingyun's entire body was drenched in cold sweat, dripping down along his naked body. He cried out in horror, "What's going on? This is a magical treasure that I've refined with my blood, sweat, and soul. How could this happen? What evil method did you use? How could you?" At this point, Zhang Tingyun could no longer continue. No matter what evil method Lord Boyong used, the question was, what kind of evil method could take away a magical treasure that a first-tier primordial immortal had refined with his blood, sweat, and soul? It would be fine if it were just an ordinary spirit or immortal artifact with very little power, but it was a chaotic spirit artifact. The White Lotus was even a supreme artifact of Primal. Putting aside Zhang Tingyun's cultivation base, both treasures had very strong sentience, which was even stronger than Zhang Tingyun's. If they were not willing, who could take them away? Cold sweat oozed out of Zhang Tingyun's forehead as he staggered backward. His body trembled intensely, and his bones let out ear-piercing creaking noises. Terrified to the extreme, Zhang Tingyun was panting heavily. For some reason, he suddenly thought of his brothers whom he had strangled to death with his own hands after he ascended to the throne. With a strange smile on his face, he approached his brothers who had no power to resist at all. Like Zhang Tingyun today, they gasped violently and retreated in horror. In that great fear, Zhang Tingyun actually felt his lower abdomen burning. He was in an unpredictable danger, but he felt great pleasure. It was a pleasure that was 100 times stronger than the pleasure brought to him by the girls lying on the ground. It was as if his own destruction was the most pleasurable thing in the world. When he heard Zhang Tingyun's cry, Lu Bang pursed his lips into a mocking smile. He kept shaking his head and sighing softly, "Your Majesty has indeed refined these magical treasures with your blood, sweat, and soul. But, Your Majesty, do you know that a human has 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls?" Zhang Tingyun glared at Lu Bang angrily. That was nonsense. Anyone who cultivated the Tao knew that a human had 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls. Lord Baoang said coldly, "There are 2 of us. I have 2 spiritual and 4 physical souls, and you have 1 spiritual and 3 physical souls. By refining these magical treasures with your soul, it's actually the same as me refining them with my soul. My 2 spiritual and 4 physical souls are stronger than your 1 spiritual and 3 physical souls, aren't they?" Zhang Tingyun looked at Lord Baoang in horror and roared furiously, "This is outrageous. My 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls are intact. How is this possible?" Lu Bang laughed. Looking complacently at Zhang Tingyun, whose face was pale and terrified, he asked slowly and proudly, "Your Majesty, you have been friends with the Celestial Court for so many years. Have you ever heard of the Forbidden Clans? With their restrictive magic, they divide 1 spiritual and 3 physical souls into 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls, and then infuse them with the divine ability of the Buddhist League with the power of willpower, replenish the power of the 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls, and then send them into transmigration. That's how Your Majesty came to be." Lord Boyong stared coldly at Zhang Tingyun and said with a sneer, "You've gone through 99,999 transmigrations in your transmigration, and each time, you've absorbed the Emperor's aura more than 90,000 times. In each transmigration, the Buddhist League escorted you into your next life, so every time you reincarnate, your dynasty will grow stronger." With a cold snort, Lord Boyong said coolly, "And I, on the other hand, have been tempered day and night by the natal star power of the few emperor stars in the 33 heavens, fusing my soul with the essence of the 6 emperor stars, North Pole, South Pole, Middle Pole, West Pole, and East Pole. What you've accumulated is the emperor's aura of the human emperor, and what I've accumulated is the emperor's aura of the celestial court." Lu Bang added, "When the 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls are reunited, the aura of the celestial emperor and the human emperor will blend perfectly, and the real new sacred emperor of the human race will take shape. Once Your Majesty leads the Ling dynasty to sweep across Pangu continent, kill all the so-called emperors of those small kingdoms in outer heavenly realms, and absorb all their emperor's aura into your body, no one in the world will be able to resist this mighty emperor's aura." Lu Bui could not wait to show off. He chuckled and said, "Originally, the human emperor of Diyu inherited the destiny of heaven and earth, and his emperor's aura was unshakable by any external force. But, the human emperor of Diyu has raised a few good sons. Now that Nuyu has split from Diyu, Diyu's emperor's aura is divided into 2 parts, and neither of them can compete with the mighty emperor's aura that Your Majesty has accumulated after gathering the emperor's aura of all the human kingdoms in outer heavenly realms. The fate of the human race is now set in stone. Even if the Wahuang clan rushes out of Empress Was Palace, she will not be able to reverse the situation." With his hands clasped behind his back, Lord Boyong raised his head proudly and said with a cold grin, "Countless outer heavenly realms have returned to Pangu continent, and the heavenly Tao has bestowed me with immeasurable virtues. I even have the opportunity to fuse with the Tao immediately. Once I do that, the title of the sacred emperor of the human race will be even more deserved. It's time for the Yellow Emperor, Shenong, and the Yen Emperor to step down from their thrones." Zhang Tingyun trembled all over. He looked at Lu Bang and the others in horror and cried out, "What about me? What about me?" Lord Boyong twitched the corner of his mouth and said with a strange smile, "You? Do you exist? You are nothing but an illusory thing. I am who I am, and you are not me." Lu Bang chuckled and said, "Of course, you're still useful. For example, this body of the Crown Prince is going to do something beneficial to the Ling dynasty, and he needs a divine lord to take charge of it. When the time comes, I'll have to trouble your majesty to make the trip." Zhang Tingyun's body trembled. He threw his head back and gave a long roar, then suddenly soared into the sky and transformed into a beam of golden light, about to rush out. With a casual point of his finger, Zhang Tingyun's body twitched, and then he suddenly fell out of the golden light with a strange cry. "I am who I am, and you are just the representation of my one spiritual soul and 3 physical forms. You don't have the chance to make the decision," said Lord Boyang in a deep voice. With a cracking sound, Lord Boyang's forehead split open, and his 2 spiritual souls and 4 physical forms turned into 6 balls of bright light, 2 purple and 4 gold. They slowly flew over to Zhang Tingyun, who was screaming in fear, and slowly squeezed into the top of his head. Zhang Tingyun's body twitched, and a line of blood split open between his brows. A hazy, powerless shadow came out of it and was forced to slowly fuse with Lord Boyang's body. This shadow was Zhang Tingyun's everything, a trace of nothingness left behind by Lord Boyang's 1 spiritual soul and 3 physical forms after he had reincarnated over 90,000 times. Before long, the reborn Zhang Tingyun slowly opened his eyes and rose to his feet. Glancing at Lord Boyang, who was standing stiffly, Zhang Tingyun waved his hand lightly. "Send him to the border and let him die a better death." Chapter 946. Even gods and ghosts were afraid of villains. As Wu Qi showed off his strength, the starlight in the sky faded away at the same time, leaving only the sun hanging high in the sky. The sunlight it emitted seemed to be even hotter. Celestial Lord of Sun was also a subject of the celestial court. He could hover high in the sky and peep at anything he wanted, and no one could accuse him of malice. After all, it was his job to shine on all things. No one answered his question, and there was no need to. Dozens of the largest rivers in the eastern region of Diyu were being flooded by the East Sea, with waves rushing straight into these rivers that were hundreds of miles wide. These rivers were vast and led straight to the hinterland of the Far East controlled by the Ling dynasty. Through these rivers, the navy of the East Sea could easily invade the territory of the Ling dynasty. If the dragon kings of the East Sea were allowed to raise the flood and do whatever they wanted, the people of the Ling dynasty might even be wiped out. Wu Qi paid no attention to the army, and all his attention was on Lord Boyang, who was riding a black qilin and looking at him with a strange smile on his face. Holding the maces with both hands, Lord Boyang smiled and nodded at Wu Qi as a greeting. Then he raised the maces and swung them down, smashing his head like a rotten watermelon. When Wu Qi's cultivation base reached the level he was at, he had the so-called ability to predict good and bad with a snap of his fingers. When the spies of the East Sea sent him the intelligence about the Ling dynasty and Zhang Tingyun, Wu Qi instinctively felt a great threat. That was why he made the decision to return to the East Sea in person, lest any mistake would lead to a problem in his lair. Wu Qi snorted as he looked coldly at the sun, which seemed to have doubled in size. In the short term, Great Wu would not have a conflict with a major power like Nuyu, and would only gradually sweep away the human kingdoms from outer heavenly realms to the east and west. There would be many small-scale battles, and a large number of soldiers would be killed or wounded. The blood-draining celestial fiends clones could use the blood essence of the dead soldiers to improve the cultivation base of the Blood Sea Grand Magic. At the same time, Wu Qi had formed a Dark-Een celestial tower with these clones, who could also use the natural energy in Great Wu's underground energy veins to speed up the cultivation of a group of powerful soldiers. Holding Princess Zhang Li's hand with a smile, Wu Qi suddenly looked up and glared at the sky. "Are your dog eyes blind? What is there to see?" Thousands of soldiers in the cabins of the 2 flying ships were severely wounded. Hastily, the oracles on the ships incanted a spell and brought up a gust of wind to send the soldiers to the nearby flying ships. Dozens of oracles raised their hands and began to recite the incantation taught by Princess Zhanglu. Pangu's sacred energy poured into the soldiers' bodies, healing their broken bones and tendons at a frightening speed. Dozens of oracles raised their hands and recited the spell taught by Princess Zhanglu. Immediately, Pangu's sacred energy poured into the soldiers' bodies, healing their broken bones and tendons at an astonishing speed. Fortunately, the celestial court on Pangu continent could not directly intervene. Otherwise, it would be very difficult for them to do anything. But this situation would not last long. Once the celestial court conferred a new celestial lord, they could also confer the title of mountain god, water god, earth god, city god, and other basic deities. These minor deities existed widely in the mortal world, and they only needed to move to Pangu continent. In addition to Tu Xiaobai, Wu Qi's 18 blood-draining celestial fiends were also here. Chu Ping stuck a finger into the heart of Lord Boyang's corpse. He squinted and carefully tried to identify something. After a long time, he nodded and said, "Strange, he seems to have transferred his soul once, and then a foreign divine sense was injected into him. It's just that the foreign thing is not even a soul, but a violent divine sense at most. What's going on?" Besides, with the hatred of Lord Baoang, the crown prince of the Celestial Court, the Celestial Court could intervene even more confidently. Billowing black smoke rolled out of the East Sea city. Standing on it, Wu Qi came to the flagship of the East Sea's army. Princess Zhang Lu and the other high-ranking officials of the East Sea hurried out to greet him. They knew that the one who showed up now was not the clone of the blood-draining celestial fiend that he usually used as a disguise, but his true self. As soon as Ao Buzan came out, he threw his head back and let out a long roar. Countless water monsters in the East Sea roared in unison, and huge waves rose into the sky, exploding in the sky and turning into a thick mist that enveloped the void. The vast expanse of Donghai, together with tens of thousands of provinces in the eastern region, was blanketed by a thick layer of watery clouds, filled with a towering demonic aura. The sun tried its best to emit blazing sunlight to break through the thick layer of demonic clouds, but with Ao Buzan's dragon power, it was not that easy to break through. After everything was settled and Gi Guzi and Mod were in charge of Great Wu's politics, Wu Qi had nothing to worry about, so he returned to the East Sea leisurely. With a soft shout, a loud boom rang out near the natal stars of the Star Lords of the heavenly courts, which were extremely high up in the starry sky. A strange gleam flickered in Wu Qi's eyes as he activated the Eyes of Thousand Ghosts, a mystic eye technique of the human race. A powerful evil force turned into an invisible blast and shot into the sky. Tu Xiaobai was now a demon immortal who had come to Great Wu's side, and the demons and fiends she had abducted along the way were another pawn Wu Qi had placed in Great Wu. The task Wu Qi had given her was not to interfere too much in Great Wu's war. In any case, wherever Great Wu's territory expanded, she would just have to take all the demons and fiends under her command. With the East Sea's army obscuring their eyes and ears in the sky, and with the death of Lord Boyang in front of the army in the East Sea, the Celestial Court had enough reason to intervene. Gradually, the army of the East Sea spread out in a straight line on both flanks. Wu Qi's warship stood out in the front, while tens of thousands of flying ships flew forward in a formation shaped like a bird. Wu Qi's warship was the head of the bird. Wherever the army passed, the slogan "Conquer the Ling dynasty, punish the unscrupulous and incapable emperor" rang out. Along the way, the garrisons of various provinces and counties, as well as the garrisons of the military towns the East Sea had deployed here, lined up in midair to greet the army. After so many years of reproduction and rest under Wu Qi's rule, the fertility of those water spirits and fiends had become extremely amazing. For example, a mola mola could lay billions of eggs at a time. Under the connivance and protection of Wu Qi, the total number of the navy of the East Sea was not amazing, but it was terrifying. The total number of the navy was more than 10 times that of the human soldiers of the East Sea. Even the few dragon kings could not figure out how many soldiers they had. In the Great Hall of Great Wu's Imperial Advisor's mansion, dozens of strange-looking demon immortals with a strong demonic aura were standing respectfully. Their leader was none other than Tu Xiaobai, the rabbit demon whom Wu Qi had taken in years ago. By Wu Qi's order, Tu Xiaobai had traveled thousands of miles from the East Sea to Great Wu, subduing countless mountain spirits and fiends along the way. These dozens of demon immortals were the leaders of those mountain spirits and fiends, the leaders who occupied land and ruled themselves as kings. "You bastard! You're framing me!" Chu Ping, who had the best temperament and the best temper among the 6 emperors, could not help but curse and stomp his warship so hard that it almost fell apart. The furious Chu Ping waved his hands repeatedly, leaving countless gray beams of light in the air. Suddenly, Lord Boyang's body flew up and fell into his hand. Once every mountain, every river, every land, and every city on Pangu continent had one or more gods conferred by the Celestial Court, the Celestial Court would not be able to hide anything from the people on Pangu continent. Only then would Pangu continent truly fall into the hands of the Celestial Court. Wu Qi twitched his mouth sullenly. The Celestial Court controlled 84,000 celestial lords, and the advantage they had was too great. For example, when the army was marching to war, all the celestial lords in the sky were staring blankly at Pangu continent. It was not a good feeling. Above the East Sea, tens of thousands of flying ships, large and small, hovered in midair, with countless soldiers standing neatly on the decks of Chi-Chi ships. Swords and spears were dazzling, armors were glowing, and banners were blocking the sun like clouds. The dull beating of drums and the shrill, sonorous sound of horns rolled up the ocean, and a few dragon kings could be seen vaguely in the midst of the waves, commanding countless water spirits and water monsters. A mighty dragon aura spread across the boundless waters of the East Sea. The whole East Sea was under its control, ready to roll up monstrous waves at any time. Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu were startled at the same time, and all the civil and military officials of the East Sea cried out in alarm at the same time. Lord Boyang's body had already fallen like a ragged hemp ribbon. When Wu Qi returned to the East Sea, Princess Zhonglu was mobilizing the armies of the 6 states to cooperate with the Central Army of the East Sea, preparing to launch an all-out attack on the Ling dynasty. The dozens of celestial lords of the Celestial Court, who were using the power of their natal stars to spy on the movements of the East Sea's army, gave a muffled grunt. Caught unprepared, they felt a sharp pain in their ears and a stabbing pain in their eyes. Tears, which had not appeared in their eyes for many years, rolled down their cheeks and fell to the ground. Before using the power of their natal stars to strengthen themselves, most of these celestial lords were only ordinary gold immortals, and some were even heaven immortals. How could they withstand Wu Qi's deliberate attack from across the air? Throwing his head back and spitting out a mouthful of crimson flame, the black Qilin's body burst into a raging fire and burned his flesh and bones to ashes in the blink of an eye. A wisp of his true soul was nowhere to be seen, just like the soul of Lord Baoang that day. Wu Qi could not find out where it had gone. Suppressing the countless thoughts in his mind, Wu Qi took Princess Zhongli's hand and stood side by side at the bow of the warship. Surrounded by the civil and military officials of the East Sea, the tens of thousands of ships sailed eastward. Above the ocean, Lord Xiansheng led countless naval forces as they sailed eastward, stirring up the waves and making the mist in the sky thicker and thicker. Those who had the bloodline of spirit beasts or even divine beasts must be carefully monitored, and their absolute loyalty to Wu Qi must be cultivated. With the blood-draining celestial fiend in charge, this was not difficult to achieve. This was the advantage that human soldiers had when fighting on Pangu continent. Unless their heads were cut off, other injuries were nothing to them. The Black Qilin looked at Wu Qi and the others in horror, and hissed, "How dare you kill the crown prince of the Celestial Court? By heaven, the Celestial Court will not let you go." If it were not for the fact that Wu Qi did not want to alarm the Celestial Court at this time and give the Celestial Court a chance to openly intervene and retaliate, he would have struck harder, and let these celestial lords know what it meant to be deaf and blind. Just as the army was about to reach the eastern border, 2 gales of green wind, each about a mile across, wrapped in 2 wheel-like objects, shot over and hit the 2 python-flying ships on either side of Wu Qi's warship. Numerous runes appeared on the deck of the flying boat, and all the defensive restrictions on the flying boat were automatically activated. But the 2 gales were so powerful that the wheels smashed into the ship's bow, destroying the internal structure of the ship as easily as crushing dry weeds and breaking through the stern. Chapter 947. The moment Lord Boyong committed suicide, a furious roar came from the Far East. "How dare you! How dare you kill my best friend? I'm going to fight you to the death with the army of the entire empire." Zhang Tingyun's roar sounded like 10,000 dragons leaping into the sky. Streams of purple smoke rushed over from the east, shattering the thick fog and demonic clouds rolled up by the navy of the East Sea. Thousands of flying ships of the East Sea at the forefront creaked as the main structures inside them cracked and fell to the ground. In dozens of great rivers, the aquatic creatures of the East Sea who followed the army of the East Sea to the east howled miserably. Hundreds of thousands of fish, prawns, crabs, and clams exploded and died, and were quickly devoured by the sharks and whales of the navy. The purple smoke that looked like a flood dragon rushed toward the army of the East Sea like a shooting star. Wu Qi gave a cold snort. His long hair stood on end as a vast black smoke billowed out of his body. All of a sudden, his body grew hundreds of feet tall and transformed into the body of a dragon man. Then he raised both fists and punched the void in front of him. The void rippled like water, and all the purple smoke shattered. Wu Qi waved his hands in front of him, drawing a huge blood rune 1,000 feet in diameter. Then, he bit the tip of his tongue and spat a mouthful of blood onto the rune, then held it with both hands and pressed it inward, compressing it into a drop of blood light the size of a needle tip. Then, he flicked his wrist and threw it forward. In a flash, the blood light pierced through the distant space and shot straight toward Zhang Tingyun, who was sitting on the throne in the great hall of the myriad spirit palace of the Ling dynasty. When the courtiers of the Ling dynasty saw the drop of blood light shooting toward Zhang Tingyun's forehead with a shrill ghost howl, they bellowed in unison and prepared to intercept it. Zhang Tingyun scolded. All the civil and military officials bowed to Chi-Chi. Zhang Tingyun carelessly grabbed the blood talisman pointed out by Wu Qi, laughed mockingly and said, "Even a grain of rice can be released, bang." The 33 evil-suppressing magic talismans that Zhang Tingyun had left on his palm were shattered by the blood-red light. The small blood-red light blasted out, and a great evil power blasted Zhang Tingyun's right palm into pieces. The evil power flowed through Zhang Tingyun's meridians and blood vessels, causing his blood vessels to swell to the size of a thumb, drilling into his body like countless poisonous snakes. With a furious cry, Zhang Tingyun's white lotus flower quietly flew up into the sky. Beams of immortal light sprinkled down, calming the evil power in him in an instant. His wounded arm healed rapidly as well, and before long, it was as good as new without leaving a scar. Zhang Tingyun's face twisted after making such a fool of himself in front of so many courtiers, and a ferocious, murderous look rose from between his brows. "Men, deploy the army. I'll lead the army myself. I'll sweep through the East Sea, conquer Liangzhu, and open up a new era for the human race." A series of orders were issued. In addition to the main army led by Zhang Tingyun to attack the East Sea, a dozen smaller armies were sent to sweep through Pangu continent. To avoid provoking De Yu and Nu Yu, the two behemoths, the army of the Ling dynasty took a detour through the southern and northern regions, specifically targeting the kingdoms of the human race that had come to Pangu continent from outer heavenly realms. They killed their emperors, extracted their emperor aura, and fused it into Zhang Tingyun's body, thus making him the human emperor. After Lord Boyong and Zhang Tingyun's souls had merged back into one, all of Zhang Tingyun's shortcomings had been inherited, and he had gained a murderous and violent aura out of nowhere. Although the original Zhang Tingyun was arrogant and willful, he was careful in everything he did. Like a poisonous snake hunting its prey, he would only strike with all his strength when he was about to kill, never giving his enemy any chance, and never putting himself in danger. But what about the new Zhang Tingyun? Liu Bang, the king of Han, the prime minister of the Ling dynasty, frowned as he stood next to his throne. Zhang Tingyun's behavior just now was very strange. Why did he stupidly try to catch the spell that Wu Qi had shot at him from afar? If it were the original Zhang Tingyun or Lord Boyong, they would not have made such a mistake. So, why did this happen when their souls had merged back into one? Perhaps it was because his soul had just been settled, and he was a little emotional. Liu Bang could only comfort himself in this way. He had learned from the South Emperor that the celestial court had put in a lot of effort for the sake of Zhang Tingyun, and that Zhang Tingyun's background was not simple either. He was once a very important figure in the Tao League, and had held a high position in the celestial court. Liu Bang suspected that this Zhang Tingyun might even be one of the great celestial emperors who had fallen in the celestial court. And that was the question. If Zhang Tingyun was really the reincarnation of such a figure, why did he make such an unwise move just now? Even if he was protected by the White Lotus as the emperor, he should not have been so rash. With his eyelids drooping, Liu Bang kept all this in mind. The Ling dynasty was very efficient, and the reason the Ling dynasty had come to Panga continent was to wage war and build a great cause. Therefore, with just an order from Zhang Tingyun, the mighty army of the Ling dynasty was assembled in just 2 hours, and under the leadership of Zhang Tingyun, they charged toward the western border. Meanwhile, the other 18 legions, large and small, marched in all directions to wipe out the kingdoms of the human race and bring them under the rule of the Ling dynasty. The East Sea Army led by Wu Qi cautiously crossed the eastern border and stepped into the territory now controlled by the Ling dynasty. The blood talisman just now did not seriously injure Zhang Tingyun, which made Wu Qi feel a little tricky. The fact that the White Lotus protecting Zhang Tingyun was a supreme artifact of primal made Wu Qi's head swell. Only those who came from the chaotic world knew what kind of freakish thing a supreme artifact of primal was. Those who owned a supreme artifact of primal had an absolute advantage over those who did not. Although the Heaven Refining Cauldron was also a supreme artifact of primal, it was purely an auxiliary item. Compared with the White Lotus, it was much weaker in battle. As for Zhang Yunting's cultivation base, Wu Qi did not take it seriously. A peak-level Dao reasoning realm cultivator was nothing to Wu Qi. With his fingers moving quickly, Wu Qi calculated the position of the stars today with the art of star divination taught to him by Gigu Zi. Then he ordered the East Seas fleet to line up according to the position of the stars, forming a round formation that combined offense and defense, and slowly moving toward the city closest to the eastern border of the Ling dynasty. The sky above the city, whose name had not even been carved on the plaque above the city gate, was shrouded in smoke and clouds. The guards in the city had already activated the city defense mechanism. In the face of the overwhelming fleet of the East Sea, the people of the Ling dynasty who were working outside the city let out deafening cries and screams. They frantically rushed to the nearest city and village, praying that these seemingly solid city walls could give them shelter. But the East Sea's fleet came too fast. When more people were still running in the fields, they were captured by the oracles of the East Sea on the flying ships and forcibly brought into the ships. Wherever the flying ships passed, not a single tile was left. All the houses were crushed, and all the people were taken away. The army only stopped when they were less than 10 miles away from the city. Wu Qi's ship was 30 miles long, and its huge size was suffocating. But the thousands of guards on the city wall did not panic at all. A general of the Ling dynasty, clad in heavy armor, even flew to a place less than 1,000 feet in front of the ship, pointed at Wu Qi and snapped, "This is the territory of the Ling dynasty. Get out of here now. This is not a place you should come to." Wu Qi was silent for a moment, then said with a smile, "I suppose the emperor of the Ling dynasty, Zhang Tingyun, is the so-called new emperor of the human race?" The general suddenly became extremely fanatical. "My emperor is the sacred emperor of the human race, destined to rule the human race for generations to come, and the throne to last forever. The human race on Pangu continent has decayed. My emperor will change the dynasty, open up a new era for this world, and build a new era for the human race." Wu Qi looked at the general, who had the cultivation base of a gold immortal. He was a real gold immortal, and what he was practicing was not the cultivation technique of the human race, but the immortal magic of the Tao League. Wu Qi could not help but sneer. The human race did not recognize the immortals as the human race. Relying on a group of immortals to open up a new era for the human race and build a new era for the human race? What a ridiculous idea. Wu Qi wanted to argue with the general, but Princess Zhang Le pointed a finger out, and a beam of blood-red light pierced through the general's forehead. With a snap, the general's body exploded into blood and gore, while a soul flew up into the sky and disappeared without a trace. When the general's soul flew up, no less than 100,000 soldiers in the East Sea Army cast restrictive spells almost at the same time, trying to capture it, including Chu Ping and a group of civil officials who were the most proficient in the art of ghosts and gods in Great Chu, including Chi-Chi. But the general's soul was as slippery as a loach in oil. Countless restrictive spells missed their target at the same time, and his soul disappeared in a flash. This was not the first time they had encountered such a situation. When Lord Baoang was killed, his soul also disappeared in a flash. Everyone was shocked. What was going on? Wu Qi pondered for a moment, then frowned and suddenly reached out his hand. A group of trembling soldiers of the Ling dynasty on the city walls screamed as Wu Qi pulled out a dozen of them. The blood centipede sword flew up, and a dozen heads flew up into the sky amidst the blood-red light, while a dozen bloody souls screamed and soared into the sky, disappearing in the blink of an eye. As soon as the sword flew out, Wu Qi had cast a soul-capturing spell to imprison these souls. But, to his surprise, his spell was resisted by a tremendous force. No matter how hard he tried, he could not capture the souls of these soldiers who were only heaven immortals. Princess Zhang Li's eyes darted around as she casually pressed her palm down. In the river below, a crucian carp with the cultivation base of Jin Dan exploded into pieces. Its soul flew timidly into the sky, and then Princess Zhang Lu reached out her hand, trying to capture it, but to no avail. It seems... Wu Qi and Princess Zhang Lu exchanged a glance. It seemed that the other party had completed the most important setup. Just as Wu Qi was calculating the impact of this situation, clouds of smoke billowed ahead. The army of the Ling dynasty led by Zhang Tingyun, an army larger than the army of the East Sea, was approaching at high speed on a cloud. Suddenly, the stars in the sky glowed brightly. Nearly 1,000 small stars located at the edge of the sky, which were not very important, flashed rapidly and shot down from the sky, falling into the ranks of the Ling dynasty's army in a flash. Wu Qi's expression changed abruptly. The celestial lords of the celestial court had descended to the world, and they had struck. It seemed that the celestial court's plan was complete, and they could not wait to swallow the fat meat that was Pangu continent. Chapter 948. Zhang Tingyun's chariot flew out of the Ling dynasty's army and toward East Sea County, which was about 100 miles away. The magnificent chariot was hundreds of feet long, and was driven by 3 gold immortals. 36 supreme oracles, 18 primordial immortals, and a considerable number of military officers of the Ling dynasty, who had reached the level of Hongmeng Panga heaven by practicing the cultivation technique of the human race, were displayed on the chariot. Treasures of land and water were displayed on the chariot, dazzling and dazzling. Dozens of enchanting maids were serving on the chariot. Celestial melodies could be heard from the chariot, and a faint floral fragrance wafted around the chariot. 18 golden dragons were pulling the chariot, each with a silver beard and a golden horn, and their claws glinting with a cold gleam. They were all upper-grade true dragons with pure-blooded bloodlines, with the cultivation base of gold immortals. Wu Qi's facial muscles were twitching at the sight of such an imposing manner and such a ceremonial procession. The chariot came to a halt when it was about 60 miles away from East Sea County, and Zhang Tingyun's voice came from afar. "King of East Sea, can I have a chat with you?" Wu Qi pondered for a moment, then took Princess Zhang Li's hand and was about to fly out to talk to Zhang Tingyun. But Ao Buzan grabbed Wu Qi and gave him a cold snort as he said, "That won't do, master. If you fly out alone, won't you bring shame to the East Sea?" Blinking at Ao Buzan, Wu Qi asked in surprise, "Then what are you going to do?" Ao Buzan whistled triumphantly. A section of the deck at the rear of the warship slowly slid open, and a chariot flew out, which stunned Wu Qi and made Princess Zhang Lu roll her eyes. As soon as the chariot appeared, all the civil and military officials of the East Sea gasped. No one knew when Ao Buzan had prepared such a big thing that could only be described as extravagant. The carriage itself was not a big deal. The carriage was square in shape and had 3 floors. Its entire body was made from the materials used to forge the Tower of Babel. The black carriage was engraved with countless images of gods and ghosts, and each statue was so lifelike that it looked like a real thing. On the top floor of the chariot were the thrones for Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu, which were wide enough for 7 or 8 people to roll on. The chariots on the lower 2 levels were guarded by 108 tall, heavily armored longbow men, all of whom had the cultivation base of peak-level gold immortals. Given their incredible innate talent, these peak-level gold immortals could almost fight against Tao-reasoning cultivators who had just stepped into the realm of primordial. If they were to fight in close quarters, those cultivators who had just stepped into the realm of primordial would probably suffer a great loss. The chariot was driven by 3 feathermen whose cultivation base had reached the realm of peak-level gold immortals. They were tall, their feathers were a magnificent golden color, and when they spread their huge wings, they looked like the legendary rocks that had descended to the mortal world. Putting these aside, the most exaggerated thing was the 3,600 jade dragons that looked as if they were made of jade that were pulling the carriage. Each of these yulong was no more than 3 feet long, but the dragon aura they emanated was extremely pure and strong, and all of them had the cultivation base of 18th tier gold immortals. The most shocking thing was that ordinary yulong only had 4 feet under their bellies. On each foot, flood dragons had 3 claws, heaven dragons had 4 claws, and true dragons had 5 claws. Legend has it that the few divine dragon elders with the highest seniority in the dragon clan had 5 legs under their abdomens, and each leg had 5 claws. This was the symbol of their pure bloodline. But these 3,600 Xiaoyalong all had 7 feet under their bellies, which made them look very different from the dragons that ordinary people were familiar with. They did not even look like dragons at all. But only the true almighty experts in the universe, those who had lived since the primordial era, knew that Arko Zulong had 9 feet under his belly, and each foot had 9 claws. The more feet and claws a dragon's had, the purer their bloodline was. With 7 feet and 7 claws, if these Xiaoyalong came to the lair of today's dragons, all the elders of the dragons would kowtow to them and call them patriarchs. Dragons attached great importance to hierarchy and hierarchy, so these Xiaoyalong were definitely the ancestors of today's dragons. Ao Buzan pointed triumphantly at the Xiaoyalong that were pulling the chariot. He laughed out loud and slapped Immortal Jadebone's buttocks, which made her so angry that she twisted and pinched his waist. Ao Buzan laughed and said, "Master has been running around outside these years." As for Lao Tzu, while Wu Qi had been running around outside, Ao Buzan had been hiding in the spirit cave under the city of the East Sea, wholeheartedly reproducing with Immortal Jadebone. The iron law that the more powerful a creature was, the more difficult it was to reproduce did not work on Ao Buzan at all. With the help of Dark Een Celestial Tower, he had spent tens of thousands of years in the spirit cave and produced tens of thousands of descendants with Immortal Jadebone. These descendants had mixed with the flood dragons in the East Sea and produced a large number of dragons in the East Sea. With Ao Buzan's bloodline, even the descendants of his children and the flood dragons were purer than the bloodline of the most senior elders of the dragons. These 3,600 Xiaoyalong were the most recent children born to Ao Buzan and Immortal Jadebone. Ao Buzan's instinct was too strong, and Immortal Jadebone's own energy essence was strong enough. She gave birth to 3,600 dragon eggs, and after 100 years of incubation, there were 3,600 little dragons, whose bodies were crystal clear and looked like they were carved out of beautiful jade. Wu Qi did not know that Ao Buzan had done so many good deeds in the past few years. As he listened to Ao Buzan's proud boasting, his fingers went numb. Trembling, he pointed at Ao Buzan and scolded, "You bastard, you let your own son pull the chariot?" If it were not for the fact that he had been friends with Ao Buzan for so many years, Wu Qi would have kicked him to death. Ao Buzan looked at Wu Qi and said confidently, "There are so many sons and grandsons of dragons. Now, many of them are pulling chariots for others, or even being mounts, aren't they? Tut, even if my son, only pulls chariots for you, can't he? Anyway, you used Lao Tzu as your mount, didn't you? Anyway, we can't lose face. Look at that guy, he used 18 real dragons to pull chariots, so we'll use 3,600 divine dragons to pull chariots." Wu Qi blinked his eyes and could not understand this logic for a long time. Ao Buzan grabbed Wu Qi and put Wu Qi on the throne with a cackle. As Ao Buzan had said, for the sake of face, it was not a big deal to let his son pull chariots for Wu Qi. Anyway, he had been Wu Qi's mount for a while. Wu Qi looked at Jade Bone Immortal helplessly. She was also cackling. Only then did Wu Qi realize that Jade Bone Immortal was an immortal of the Devil League. It was impossible for him to have any mother-son relationship with her. Looking at the 3,600 Xiaoyalong, which were no more than 3 feet long, Wu Qi could not help but feel sad. Poor children, how did they end up with such a pair of horrible parents? Huang Liang led a group of generals with the highest cultivation base in the East Sea to guard the extremely luxurious and pompous chariot. The 3 feather men who were driving the chariot shouted, and the 3,600 Xiaoyalong breathed out clouds and mist at the same time, easily pulling the chariot forward. Sitting on the throne, Wu Qi heard Ao Buzan whispering to Jade Bone Immortal, "What do you think of Lao Tzu's idea? Master doesn't need this chariot at ordinary times. When we go out, we can let these little bastards pull the chariot. That will be the best." Wu Qi almost vomited blood. Was this chariot forged by Ao Buzan for himself? Jade Bone Immortal smiled with satisfaction and said in a low voice, "Isn't that right? This chariot is 100 times better than the chariots of the great emperors of the Devil Realm. I've worked so hard to raise these little bastards, so it's only right for them to pull the chariot." Sitting next to Wu Qi, Princess Zhang Li's face twitched. She closed her eyes and blocked her hearing, barely holding back the urge to jump up and kick Ao Buzan and Jade Bone Immortal to the ground and beat them up. With Wu Qi's child in her belly, Princess Zhang Li's maternal instincts were aroused. How could she tolerate Ao Buzan and Jade Bone Immortal mistreating her own child? Perhaps she would not return the chariot to Ao Buzan. As for the 3,600 lovely Xiaoyalong, Princess Zhang Lu was going to take them over herself and train them well. It would be fine if they were those hideous black dragons or demon dragons, but how could she let Ao Buzan and the others abuse such a lovely Xiaoyalong? The 3,600 Xiaoyalong formed an array of 180 by 20, pulling the chariot all the way to Zhang Tingyun's chariot. Finally, they stopped when they were about a mile away from Zhang Tingyun's chariot. When Zhang Tingyun, who was drinking wine from a jade cup, saw the 3,600 Xiaoyalong, his fingers loosened, and the cup fell to the ground with a clang. The 18 true dragons who had been pulling the chariot were even more obedient. They had long retracted their clouds and glows, bent their 4 legs and lowered their gigantic heads, showing their utmost respect to these powerful beings of the dragon kind. Lu Bang's eyes went wide as he stared at the 7-legged and 7-clawed Xiaoyalong. He swayed and almost fell to the ground. 7 legs and 7 claws, this was a characteristic that only the pure-blooded divine dragons could have. After countless apocalypses, the dragons had been greatly impacted. Countless pure-blooded divine dragons had fallen, and the remaining dragons had been forced to mix with various flood dragons and pythons in order to reproduce their bloodline. As a result, dragons with the bloodline of divine dragons were extremely rare nowadays. 3,600 divine dragons were used to pull the chariot? Lu Bang was trembling all over. Even the few patriarchs of Dao League did not have such extravagance. Even if the 9 Daozu of Dao League wanted to use divine dragons to pull the chariot, they would not be able to find so many pure-blooded divine dragons. Zhang Tingyun and Lu Bang looked at Wu Qi and Princess Zhang Lu at the same time. The more they looked at them, the more enigmatic they felt. Ao Buzan stood next to Wu Qi, proudly arching his lower abdomen. He chuckled and said, "Are you surprised? Are you shocked? Are you frightened by so many divine dragons? Hey, damn it, immortal Jadebone, how much do you think they are willing to pay for a pure-blooded divine dragon?" Wu Qi could not bear it any longer. He performed a secret spell and sealed the mouths of Ao Buzan and immortal Jadebone so that they could not move or speak. These 2 bastards, how did they end up as a pair? With a cold snort, Wu Qi cupped his fists at Zhang Tingyun and said, "Emperor of the Ling dynasty, I pay my respects to you." Zhang Tingyun glanced at Princess Zhang Lu. his eyes flashing with lust. Then, Zhang Tingyun focused all his attention on the 3,600 Xiaoyalong. He looked at Wu Qi and said in a deep voice, "King of East Sea, these little dragons are not yet adults, right? How could you have the heart to let them pull the chariot? Well, if I'm interested in buying them, I wonder if the King of East Sea would sell them?" Zhang Tingyun's question nearly made Wu Qi cough out blood. He snorted grumpily and cried out coldly, "I'm not selling." Zhang Tingyun was about to say something when Wu Qi snapped impatiently, "If you have something to say, just spit it out. Hurry up and tell us. Can we start the fight now?" A surge of anger rose in Zhang Tingyun's heart. He sneered and slowly rose to his feet. Chapter 949. The faces of Lu Bang and Lu Buwei turned blue with anger. They glared at Wu Qi angrily, then bowed to Zhang Tingyun at the same time and said, "Your Majesty, please understand that this is a deliberate attempt to sow discord." Wu Qi glanced at the man. The fluctuation of star power around him was very obvious, so he should be one of the celestial lords from the lower realm. After panting violently for a while, Lu Bang glared at Wu Qi and growled, "King of East Sea, as an important minister of Diyu, why do you have fiend immortals who practice fiend Dao cultivation techniques under your command? Why do you have so many mountain spirits and water demons in your East Sea army? Are you still a minister of Diyu?" Lu Bang could not stand being accused by Wu Qi again and again. In a moment of desperation, he seized on some of Wu Qi's mistakes and began to counterattack. Zhang Tingyun, Lu Bang, and Lu Buwei stared at Wu Qi, and all of them had the urge to vomit blood. One could be shameless, but not to this extent, could one? The mighty prince of Diyu had brought countless aquatic demons with him, and they were actually the army rations? Zhang Tingyun nodded and said, "Of course, those celestial lords will not attack a single soldier of the East Sea." Wu Qi rose to his feet and looked coldly at Zhang Tingyun. Zhang Tingyun's expression turned very strange. He looked back thoughtfully at Lu Bang. The armies of golden immortal generals, oracles, immortals, itinerant cultivators, demons, and ghosts would attack each other, and the one who conquered the enemy's capital first would be the winner. If the army of the East Sea conquered the city of Wanling, Zhang Tingyun would admit defeat. If the army of the Ling dynasty conquered the city of East Sea, Wu Qi would lose everything. Gritting his teeth, Zhang Tingyun was about to speak when Wu Qi stepped in front of Zhang Tingyun and said to Lu Bang with a smile, "King of Han, Lu Bang, you are too good at currying favor. What is your position in the Ling dynasty now?" Those with cultivation bases above the realm of primordial immortals could not do it themselves, but they could bestow magical treasures, talismans, spirit pills, and miraculous medicines at will. Lu Buwei's face was no longer blue but green, while Zhang Tingyun's eyes were twitching with anger. He glared at Lu Buwei, pointed a finger at Wu Qi and snapped, "King of East Sea, don't make me look down on you." Wu Qi shuddered and dared not to joke anymore. He turned and pointed a finger at Zhang Tingyun and snapped, "Bullshit. Zhang Tingyun, I don't want to waste my breath on you. The army of the East Sea is here today, and we will not let this go easily. Since you are here with your army, why don't we discuss a plan to decide the future of the East Sea and the Ling dynasty?" Xiang Yu grabbed his helmet and patted his neck. "Here's my head. If you need it, King of East Sea, feel free to take it." Lu Bang was about to cry, but Xiang Yu refused to let him go. Pointing a finger at Lu Bang, he snapped, "Brother Lu Bang, how many years have we not seen each other? How have you been? You and I are brothers, and although there have been some misunderstandings between us, our brotherhood is as precious as gold and jade. If you have the ambition to compete for the position of the human emperor, then you can have my head." Lu Bang's face turned as pale as a green carrot. Before Lu Bang could say anything, Wu Qi had already grabbed Xiang Yu from the East Sea fleet behind him. Smiling, Wu Qi asked Xiang Yu, the hegemon king of Western Chu, "If Lu Bang wants to fight for the throne of the human emperor, will you submit to me if I kill you?" Smiling, Lu Bang cupped his fist at Wu Qi and said, "Please excuse me, King of East Sea. I am now the Prime Minister of the Ling dynasty, in charge of the military affairs and the court affairs. Lu Bang was speechless. Is this really a fresh military food? Lazily glancing at Zhang Tingyun, Wu Qi let go of Lu Buwei, whose face had turned green. Smiling, he nodded at Lu Bang and said, "King of Han, you are a talented man, why do you submit to others? If you have the ambition to become the human emperor, do you dare to swear that you will fight for the throne wholeheartedly? I will kill Xiangyu right now, and the army of the East Sea will fully support you in fighting for the throne." The so-called external forces were none other than the Celestial Court and Yu. If any immortal of the Celestial Court appeared in the Ling dynasty's army, the Ling dynasty would lose. If Yu supported even one soldier of the East Sea, the East Sea would lose. Zhang Tingyun nodded with a smile. Then he gave Princess Zhang Lu a look and said in a deep voice, "In this case, you and I swear that when the Ling dynasty and the East Sea go to war, only cultivators below the level of primordial can fight. What do you say?" The two of them talked for a long time and discussed many terms and conditions. Finally, they reached an agreement to go to war. As soon as Wu Qi returned to the chariot, he grabbed Ao Buzan and said, "You have to work hard to give birth to them. How many can you give birth to when only gold immortal generals are allowed to fight?" Beside him, Princess Zhang Li's face darkened. But when they stood together, everyone's eyes would be attracted by Wu Qi. It was a kind of worship that one felt when looking up at the starry sky on a summer night and seeing countless stars, and being shocked by the vastness of heaven and earth and the infinity of the universe. Zhang Tingyun was just an emperor in the mortal world, while Wu Qi was a lofty and unfathomable existence, just like how primitive humans were ignorant of the heavenly Tao, and felt the mysteriousness of the thunderbolts and raindrops, and worshipped them. After a moment of silence, Wu Qi shook his head gently. In a battle between experts of the realm of Tao reasoning and Tao breaking, a slight carelessness could result in the collapse of billions of miles of the void. Years ago, when the almighty experts fought each other, the Pangu continent was smashed into countless pieces during the apocalypse of heaven and earth, forming the outer heavenly realms of today. If the elites of Wu Qi and Zhang Tingyun fought with all their might, as long as the nearly 1,000 celestial lords of the Ling dynasty rushed out at the same time, the armies of both sides would probably perish together. In front of them, ordinary soldiers could not resist at all. Well, Wu Qi was really shameless, but how could one refute him? Those little demons of the Jindan realm had everything you could think of, including lobsters, abalones, prawns, oysters, and so on. It was absolutely right to say that they were the army's provisions. If you said they were not the army's provisions, but insisted that they were the regular army of the East Sea Army, then what was that catfish doing? After all the terms were worked out, Wu Qi and Zhang Tingyun announced it in public. Neither of them swore an oath, and it was clear that they both knew the oath was not very reliable. After that, the armies of both sides retreated at the same time, preparing for all kinds of plans before the battle. Zhang Tingyun pondered for a while, then nodded to Wu Qi and said, very well. Let's set the rules." Ao Buzan stuck out his chest proudly and cried out, "Give me enough women, and Lao Tzu will drown the whole Ling dynasty with an army of dragons as strong as gold immortals." Wu Qi made a fuss and cried out, Let the king of Han be the prime minister? Then, the emperor of the Ling dynasty must be very careful. How could the king of Han be a man who would submit to someone else? Don't be like Prime Minister Lu Buwei, who serves the king of Han, overthrowing the emperor and becoming the emperor himself. Zhang Tingyun narrowed his eyes and gave Princess Zhang Lu a look. Just as he was about to order the whole army to attack and destroy the East Sea Army at all costs, a middle-aged man, who was clad in a long green robe and had an ugly face like a crab, suddenly came out from behind the curtain of the chariot. The man whispered a few words into Zhang Tingyun's ear, then gave Wu Qi a deep look, turned around, and retreated behind the curtain. Apart from the fact that they could not attack in person, all other schemes and plots were allowed. For example, it was absolutely not allowed for Princess Zhang Lu to curse a general of the Ling dynasty to death, but it was absolutely allowed for Princess Zhang Lu to build an altar and teach a priest of the East Sea to curse a general of the Ling dynasty to death. Lu Bang was so frightened that his heart skipped a beat. He quickly pointed at Xiangyu and snapped, "Nonsense! Nonsense!" Wu Qi glanced at Princess Zhonglu and suddenly laughed. "Zixuan, you are the human emperor." Lu Bang was completely defeated. His head drooped and he did not say another word. Staring coldly at Wu Qi, Zhang Tingyun raised his hand and pointed at Wu Qi a few times. "Good, King of East Sea, you have the qualifications to achieve great things with such an ability. Give me the woman beside you, and when I step down from the throne of the human emperor and become the emperor of the celestial court, I will consider letting you take over the throne." Both men were keenly aware of the difference between them. Wu Qi smiled faintly, while Zhang Tingyun's face was wrinkled and very ugly. Facing Wu Qi, Zhang Tingyun felt a sense of inferiority, which made him feel an indescribable anger. Army provisions? Looking at the mighty army of East Sea, Zhang Tingyun smiled and said, "King of East Sea, if all the experts from our side join hands and fight a fierce battle here, do you think our army can survive?" In the nearest river, Catfish Flood Dragon was lying lazily on the back of a huge sea turtle, grabbing 2 lobster demons and nibbling them with great relish. Surrounding the turtle were countless lobster demons with some cultivation base, and it looked like they were all the army snacks Catfish Flood Dragon had prepared for herself. Wu Qi raised his brows indifferently and said coolly, "It doesn't matter. If you succeed in sowing discord, you can kill both of them, and I will have a lot of troubles saved. But if you fail, what harm will it bring to me?" Lu Buwei, are you sure you won't make Zhang Tingyun a mere figurehead? I don't think he looks like a human emperor. If you, Lu Buwei, dare to kill him and ascend the throne yourself, I, Wu Qi, swear that the army of East Sea will definitely help you put down the resistance of Ling Dynasty. Both sides would use all the forces they had now as the standard, and no external forces would be allowed to interfere. In terms of height, Wu Qi was a little shorter than Zhang Tingyun, and in terms of appearance, Zhang Tingyun's face was almost a work of art carved from jade, and Wu Qi was even inferior to him. In terms of bearing, Zhang Tingyun had all the qualities that an emperor should have, such as a domineering, heroic spirit, awe-inspiring air, and so on. He even looked so elegant, handsome, and elegant. Staring coldly at Lu Bang, Wu Qi patted Xiangyu's shoulder and said with a cold grin, "Xiangyu is my captive. Don't tell me I can't order him to march and fight? As for those water spirits and water monsters..." Lowering his head to look at the seemingly endless army of East Sea in the few rivers near and far, Wu Qi nodded at Lu Bang with a smile and said, "They are the army's rations. They are the fresh rations brought by the East Sea army. Is that a problem for you?" Princess Zhonglu rolled her eyes at Wu Qi. Gently stroking her lower abdomen with both hands, she said slowly, "If this child's father dares to exchange me for anything, I'll strangle him to death right now, and then drag his father to death with me." Thinking of those celestial lords just now, Wu Qi smiled and said, "If someone's cultivation base has not reached the state of primordial, but they..." Zhang Tingyun sneered. Suppressing the murderous intent in his heart when he heard Wu Qi's words, he waved his hand gently and said, "How can I not know that this is a trick of others? Just work for the Ling Dynasty loyally, and there will be benefits for both of you in the future." Laughing coldly, Zhang Tingyun raised his head proudly and said to Wu Qi, "The King of East Sea has overestimated me." Chapter 950. In the city of East Sea, Wu Qi sat cross-legged in a secret chamber with his nascent divinity unleashed, controlling the blood-draining celestial fiends to move around. Great Wu's war against the outside world had reached a climax. More and more soldiers had joined the army, more and more mountain spirits and water monsters had joined the army, and more immortal sects and itinerant cultivators had joined Great Wu, becoming disciples of the imperial advisor. After releasing Swearin Feng, who had been captured alive, and quickly breaking away from contact with New Yu, Great Wu had been fighting on both the eastern and western fronts. Almost every day, several mortal kingdoms from outer heavenly realms were annexed by Great Wu. At the behest of the blood-draining celestial fiends, the emperors of those kingdoms were taken back to Great Wu's capital city, and Wu Tianming cut off their heads with his own hands. As Wu Qi had expected, the emperor aura in those emperors had all fused into Wu Tianming's body. The purple emperor aura in Wu Tianming's body, shaped like a flood dragon, had grown stronger and clearer. The 10-foot-long purple flood dragon had gradually grown eyes and scales, and even its thin whiskers could be seen clearly. Nu Yu was furious about Sui Renfeng's capture, and the emperor even ordered an army to hunt down Great Wu. But Du Yu began to launch a tentative attack on Nu Yu. Emperor Haozuan personally led a large army, divided into 36 armies, and attacked Nu Yu's border. Among Emperor Haozuan's army were ancient immortals and ancient deities from Xinyuan Peak, as well as a large number of divine beasts and birds in human form. Nu Yu was shocked, and the emperor could only mobilize all his armies to fight against Du Yu. He could no longer pay attention to Great Wu. Emperor Haozuan launched an attack on Nu Yu from the north, while in the southern region of Du Yu, some of the deities serving the Yan Emperor, Shenong, had led a large army. An army composed of countless strange humans poured out of the great marsh in the south and stabbed Nu Yu in the back. Now, Nu Yu was in for a good time. Du Yu began to confront Nu Yu head-on, Wu Qi's army in the East Sea began to compete with the Ling dynasty, and Gao's army in the west seemed to have encountered a formidable enemy. He had sent a few blood-draining celestial fiends there to gather information, and if possible he would secretly help Gao kill a few of his opponents in secret. It would not be a bad idea to kill a few of Gao's opponents. The war had officially broken out on Panga continent, and the major powers in the north, south, east, and west were engaged in a chaotic battle. Overall, it seemed that Du Yu still had the upper hand. At the very least, Du Yu did not seem to be at a disadvantage in the three-way battle. However, no one knew how long this situation would last. A wisp of Wu Qi's nascent divinity transformed into a tiny electric pigeon, hovering in midair and watching the East Sea County attacking the cities of the Ling dynasty in the distance. However, the fist-sized electric pigeon was also a kind of divine bird, one of the lesser divine birds. It was born with the ability to control thunder and lightning, and could fly at an incredible speed. The reason why Wu Qi transformed his nascent divinity into an electric pigeon was to make it easier for him to escape. After all, the overall strength of the Ling dynasty was extremely strong, and he did not want to lose a wisp of his divine will for no reason if it was discovered by someone. Below Wu Qi, leading an army of 300,000 to attack the city ahead, was Yingxing, the last emperor of Deqin. Dozens of Deqin's descendants were gathered around him. They all possessed the overall strength of gold immortals, which was in line with the agreement drawn up by Wu Qi and Zhang Tingyun. Arrows were falling like rain, blades and spears were forming a forest, and the soldiers of the East Sea County were approaching the city in a neat phalanx with heavy shields on their heads. Pushed by countless soldiers, hundreds of large battle machines made by the disciples of Mo's school approached the city wall. When they were still 20 miles away from the city wall, they stopped. Their thick legs were lowered from around the battle machines, piercing deep into the ground. A whistle rang out, and countless thumb-sized iron balls shot out from the war machines like thunderbolts, smashing onto the city wall like a heavy rain. The ground was shaking, and the deafening booms made people lose their footing, while the bright light made people's eyes hurt. These iron balls were carefully mixed by the disciples of Mo's sect, and each of them contained the essence of a heavenly thunder. Countless iron balls bombarded the wall in front of them, and the defense of the city was greatly weakened by the bombardment of the iron balls. After that, a series of clicking noises could be heard coming from the war machines, as thousands of spears, each as thick as a bowl, shot out with a deep, muffled whistle, thrusting heavily into the city wall in the distance. At the same time, the tails of these spears began to spin rapidly, from which numerous yellow talismans, each about 10 feet wide and several hundred feet long, dangled down. These talismans were made using fine yellow satin, and on their surfaces, vermilion runes that looked like swimming dragons could be clearly seen. These talismans were made by the disciples of Gigu Zi, the Gigu Valley's disciples. They were the mountain-splitting talismans which could restrain the natural energy in the underground energy veins and interfere with the flow of the underground energy veins. As soon as the spears pierced into the city wall, the talismans unfolded, releasing a jarring red light that transformed into countless streams of light, seeping into the city wall and drilling into the ground. A loud boom rang out as the city wall crumbled abruptly, and an earth-yellow earth energy rushed up into the sky. Several thousand soldiers who guarded the city were thrown into midair by the earth energy, howling and wailing. Their bodies were shredded by the earth energy, and they were killed on the spot. The East Sea Army cheered. Ingzing raised the spear in his hand and pointed it forward. Immediately, all the 300,000 soldiers of the East Sea Army, except for 100,000 soldiers who were left in reserve, immediately set off and marched into the city in an offensive formation. Along the way, Ingzing had broken through the defense of the city with the talismans, then launched a surprise attack with the superior force of the army, looting the people and treasures in the city. With this method, Ingzing had conquered 2 military towns of the Ling dynasty, and this was the first major city of the Ling dynasty that he had ever encountered. Although the Ling dynasty had a large number of soldiers, the Ling dynasty also had a great number of cities and military towns that needed to be defended. So, if a major city of the Ling dynasty could be defended by several tens of thousands of soldiers, it would already be considered an incredible city. The city before him had only 10,000 soldiers, and among them, 4,000 to 5,000 were killed by the earth energy that soared up when the city wall crumbled. Currently, the remaining soldiers made up less than 2 to 3% of Ingzing's army. Wu Qi bowed his head and gave the major city of the Ling dynasty a look, where the city wall had crumbled, then looked into the distance. Across the long battlefront, the armies of the East Sea Army had divided themselves into over 100 attacking points to attack the Ling dynasty. In each of these attacking points, there were a few small armies like Ingzing's marching side by side. These over 100 attacking points were in coordination with each other from a distance. More or less, they still formed the 7 armies of the East Sea Alliance, which were divided into 3 main attacking forces. None of this required Wu Qi to rack his brain. The elites of the 6 dynasties knew how to fight a war, how to cooperate with each other, and how to suppress the enemy with a tide-like offensive, making it impossible for the enemy to breathe or fight back. In the hands of this group of freaks, a bloody war had become an art. Compared to this group of freaks from the 6 dynasties, it was true that the Ling dynasty had countless fierce generals, but it seemed that their combat attainments were not much better than the generals of the Yu Alliance. These generals of the Ling dynasty were simple-minded. The most common tactic they used was to open the city gates and fight head-on with the East Sea Army. But with experts in the art of war such as Sun Bin and Pang Wan, it would be fine if these generals of the Ling dynasty just stayed in the city and waited to be attacked. But once they opened the city gates and fought the East Sea Army in the field, they would not even know how they died. In a forest 1,000 miles away, a column of flames soared into the sky. Wu Qi was flying high up in the sky and looking into the distance. Over there, an army under the command of a great-grandson of Pang Wan had just ambushed the 20,000 soldiers of the Ling dynasty by taking advantage of the terrain. He did not even attack, but directly broke through the earth's crust and brought down the raging underground fire, burning the 20,000 soldiers of the Ling dynasty. Only the few generals who led the army escaped, but they were immediately surrounded and hacked to death by the superior forces of the East Sea Army. Wu Qi could not help but laugh. It seemed that the Ling dynasty was used to having a smooth life in outer heavenly realms, and they did not know how to fight a war at all. Even as he was feeling complacent, Ingzing suddenly gave a muffled snort down below, followed by the shrill cries of countless soldiers of the East Sea Army. When Wu Qi looked down in horror, he saw a Taoist with disheveled hair, clad in a Taoist robe made of rags, and holding an iron gourd in his hand. He was chasing after the 200,000 soldiers of the East Sea Army and attacking them. Ingzing and the many generals around him were bleeding profusely, throwing away their helmets and armors and fleeing to the rear with the army. A great plume of black smoke was spraying out of the 3-foot-tall iron gourd in the Taoist's hand. Countless thumb-sized, pitch-black wasps that looked like they were forged from steel were flying all over the sky, and when they caught an East Sea Army soldier, they would stab him with a needle. It was unknown what kind of special wasps these wasps were, But as the soldiers of the East Sea Army had cultivated the true body of heaven and earth scripture to the realm of heaven immortal, their fleshly bodies were so strong that they could withstand thunderbolts. However, the poisonous stingers of the wasps could easily stab into their bodies, and when the poisonous gas flared up, they would turn into fist-sized pustules, with yellow and green liquid oozing out of them. There were 5,000 oracles in the army of 300,000 soldiers. When they saw that the wasps unleashed by the Taoist were so vicious, all 5,000 oracles of the East Sea flew up into the sky at the same time and sprinkled numerous spirit talismans down. Some of them even took out fist-sized jars and sprayed out a dark medicinal liquid that came with a pungent smell of herbs, covering every soldier of the East Sea Army. When the medicinal liquid touched the soldiers, sizzling noises could be heard. Instead of healing, the wounds on their bodies were rapidly expanding and rotting. The oracles were startled and hastily stopped their work of sprinkling the medicinal liquid to detoxify the soldiers. On Ing Xing's forehead, there were 3 pustules the size of fists, dripping with pus, which made him unable to see where he was going. Then he slammed his head into a tree. Nevertheless, as he had a strong fleshly body, the tree was smashed to pieces by him. Like a wild boar that had gone mad, he led the several 100,000 soldiers of the East Sea and fled at top speed towards the rear. After chasing for a while, the Taoist retracted the wasps. With a complacent smile on his face, he turned to the fleeing soldiers of the East Sea and said, "I'm Taoist B, an idler from Mount Gu'in. The human Emperor Yu is a tyrannical man, and I've followed the will of heaven and descended the mountain to help the sacred emperor of the Ling dynasty unify the human race. This is a deed of great merit. I'll spare your lives today, but if you dare to invade again, don't blame me for being merciless." Wu Qi nearly spat out a thunderbolt and killed this Taoist B, who only possessed the cultivation base of 16th tier gold immortal. Why did this scene sound so familiar? When Wu Qi was reading some idle books, didn't those Taoists in the investiture of the gods use the same tone? "You bastards! Do you really want to play this game on Pangu continent? Idlers from outside? Does this count as the intervention of an external power?" After a brief moment of pondering, Wu Qi shook his head helplessly. The Taoist B was participating in the war as an individual, so how could he be considered as an external power? He frowned in distress. This is going to be a big problem. Chapter 951. But, for the people on Pangu continent, they were a very powerful enemy. Standing off to the side, Catfish Flood Dragon smacked her lips with saliva dripping down from the corner of her mouth. She turned her head away from B and said, lest she could not help but swallow him and break the agreement between the East Sea and the Ling dynasty. "Is there anyone in Wuna City who dares to fight me?" Ing Ziying's army was only one of the armies defeated by Taoist B. Dozens of other armies had encountered itinerant immortals who called themselves idlers like Taoist B. Relying on all kinds of strange poisons, some mystic divine abilities, or some strange magical treasures, they had defeated 47 armies of the East Sea in a row. Nearly 30,000 soldiers were killed, and 80% of the rest were severely wounded. Since some so-called idlers had joined the Ling dynasty, more and more itinerant immortals who were proficient in all kinds of strange and bizarre means would join them. It was true that the East Sea had many soldiers and generals, but because of the agreement between the two sides, no one above the realm of primordial could join them. Therefore, ordinary soldiers of the East Sea would suffer a great loss if they encountered these itinerant immortals. Of the dozens of soldiers lying in the Great Hall, only one was wounded by Taoist B, and the rest were wounded by other itinerant immortals. Some of them were festering all over, some had their souls wounded, some were blind, and some were as stiff as zombies. All kinds of strange injuries could not be treated by the oracles of the East Sea, so they could only be sent here for Princess Zhonglu to think of a solution. No wonder the oracles in the front line treated the wounded soldiers with antidotes they had concocted in advance, which made their injuries worse. The antidotes did remove some of the toxins in the mixed venom, but instead, they mutated with other ingredients into a more vicious poison, causing the soldiers to suffer more serious injuries. Fortunately, Princess Zhongli had thoroughly studied Wu Qi's pill manual, and Wu Qi had taught Princess Zhongli many of the methods of Elder Yuan Ling in her previous life. Otherwise, these strange injuries would not have been healed. Many of her injuries were related to some unique poisons in the chaos, and some were the killing curses passed down by the chaos fiend god. If Princess Zhongli had only inherited the ancient Tao of divinity, she wouldn't have been able to deal with those incredible powers and secret techniques of the chaos fiend god. A few black-robed oracles of the East Sea walked out. They held bone staffs in their hands and looked at the wasp Tao. After reciting a few spells, they pointed their bone staffs at the wasp Tao. It was the same for the other 47 armies who had suffered a setback. The individual immortals who went to battle were far weaker than the generals who led the armies. If they fought with their real cultivation bases, the generals of the East Sea could easily kill them. But with the help of some strange poisons, strange curses, and bizarre magical treasures, they managed to defeat over 40 armies of the East Sea and make them flee with their tails between their legs. Holding Princess Zhongli in his arms, Wu Qi was also thinking about how to continue the war. After the incident with the wasp Tao, Wu Qi suddenly realized that the foundation of the East Sea was not strong enough. Facing the various tricks of the Ling dynasty, if the East Sea could only be beaten passively, it would be too disadvantageous for them. As the rotting energy bees came from the chaos, their poisons were mixed with a wisp of chaos energy, which made the poison-expelling curse of the Directorate of Celestials ineffective. That was why the army of 300,000 soldiers led by Ying Xing suffered a crushing defeat, with over 200,000 soldiers severely wounded. Although formidable creatures like the Chaos Fiend God were born in the chaos, there were also all kinds of strange creatures who were much weaker than the Chaos Fiend God. For example, the rotting energy bees were one of them. In the chaos, they were born with the cultivation base of heaven immortals, but they were the weakest existences. As they only possessed the cultivation base of gold immortals when they reached adulthood, they were often the prey of other formidable creatures. The atmosphere in the Great Assembly Hall was oppressive. The higher-ups of the East Sea were frowning, trying to come up with a way to break out of this predicament. The sound of battle broke out in all directions, as a dozen itinerant immortals who had joined the Ling dynasty had blocked the city gate of Jindong City. Jindong City was the easternmost city within the East Sea's sphere of influence, and the actual headquarters of the East Sea Army. After a brief moment of pondering, Princess Zhongli, who had thoroughly studied all the alchemy manuals in Wu Qi's previous life, began to recite the names of a large number of herbs in a low voice. The priestess standing next to her quickly wrote down the names of the herbs and the method of decocting them on a jade slip, preparing to brew a large number of medicinal decoctions to treat these soldiers. The foundation of the East Sea Army was still too weak, and they lacked talents who were proficient in all kinds of strange arts. The Celestial Court, on the other hand, had been operating in outer heavenly realms for countless years, and had spread their Tao League to countless itinerant immortals who were proficient in all kinds of strange arts. As long as they needed it, they could easily mobilize as many itinerant immortals as individuals to join the Ling dynasty. Princess Zhongli was standing next to a soldier who had been stung by a hornet from Taoist bee, together with a few young ladies dressed in the black robes of priestesses. The soldier was barely conscious, but he was so feverish that if an egg was placed on him, it would be cooked in just a few seconds. His body was densely covered with pustules the size of fists, from which pus kept dripping down, leaving long, sticky threads in the air. Taoist bee was still dressed as before, with 3,000 soldiers standing in a straight line behind him. Holding the iron gourd in his hand, he stared proudly at the city gate and cried out, "I'm Taoist bee from Mount Guin. May I ask, which fellow Taoist from the East Sea dares to fight me?" Shaking his thighs proudly, Taoist bee smiled and said, "Seniors of the realm of Primordial, don't worry. According to the agreement between the Ling dynasty and the East Sea, you can only watch from the sidelines, and you must never fight." The hornets controlled by Taoist bee must have obtained the queen of an energy-rotting wasp, and then mixed her blood with some poisonous insects from Pangu world, thus producing this kind of hornet with complex and potent toxicity. From the needles, Princess Zhangli could smell the scent of 36 different poisonous plants. When these things were mixed together and fed to the poisonous creatures, it would make the toxicity of the poisonous creatures even harder to deal with. One by one, the soldiers looked at the needles and came up with a treatment method for them. Quickly, a few female oracles recorded the treatment method given by Princess Zhangli on jade slips, then handed them to the generals of the 6 dynasties who were waiting nearby to quickly use them to treat the soldiers. While Princess Zhangli was treating the soldiers, news came that the wounded soldiers had begun to die in large numbers, and some soldiers who were cursed by the zombie curse had begun to shed their skin and turn into black-haired zombies, wreaking havoc everywhere. Suddenly, a ghostly howl rang out, and a large sheet of light that looked like a white lotus suddenly emerged around Taoist B. The curse cast by the oracles of the East Sea was turned into nothingness by the white light, and did not hurt even a single hair of Taoist B's. Taoist B laughed complacently. Pointing at the top of the city wall, he scolded, "What do you demons know? I have a jade purity talisman personally given to me by His Majesty, which makes me impervious to all evils and spells. With your cultivation base of gold immortals, how could you possibly hurt me?" There was no record about the zombie curse in Diyu's Directorate of Celestials. Only Princess Zhangli knew that although the zombie curse was brutal, it could be easily cured by picking 3 of the most common rue leaves and carving a talisman on them. Although it looked simple, this easy and simple treatment method was discovered in the ancient times with the sacrifice of countless people. Looking at the many emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties in the Great Hall, Princess Zhangli shook her head and said, "It's still unknown whether this 6 Harmonies body cleansing soup is effective or not. Stop attacking now, and pay attention to guarding all the military towns, cities, and strategic passes. We can't let Ling Dynasty take the opportunity to take advantage of us." "Curse him to death." Wu Qi snorted coldly. Taking Taoist B as an example, in terms of actual cultivation base, Ying Ziying could easily poke holes all over his body with a single spear. However, just by relying on the hybrid of yuan rotting bees and other poisonous creatures, the army of several hundreds of thousands of soldiers led by Ying Ziying was completely routed and suffered a great number of casualties. For example, there was a soldier lying on a wooden platform, his body twitching. His skin was dry and cracked like cowhide, and his muscles had turned black like necrosis. He was struck by the zombie curse of a certain chaos fiend god, Lord Zombie, who had fallen countless years ago. It was a ferocious curse that could forcibly turn a living man into a bloodthirsty zombie that could fly in the sky and burrow into the ground. Before Taoist B's voice could fade away, tens of teams of Ling Dynasty came rushing towards them. Each team had a total of 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers, and the leader of each team was a Taoist dressed in a strange outfit. Shouting and yelling, they were approaching East Suppression City at top speed. A wooden platform about half the height of a man was placed in a straight line in the middle of the great assembly hall. Several dozens of burly men were lying on the platform, their lower bodies wrapped in underpants. All of them had strange injuries on their bodies. Pus, blood and pus were dripping all over the ground, and a foul stench was so strong that no one in the hall could open their eyes. Wu Qi's face turned extremely unsightly when he was challenged by someone at the city gate. Suddenly, a military officer standing next to Huang Liang let out a loud cry and sprung up into the air, swinging his sword and slashing it towards Taoist B. This military officer possessed the cultivation base of 3 Panga Heaven Realm, and in terms of overall strength, he could absolutely suppress Taoist B. But as soon as he sprung up into the air, a dark shadow flashed by. The military officer shrieked miserably, covered his mouth with both hands, and ran back. After a few steps, he tilted his body and fell heavily to the ground. Wu Qi saw clearly that a wasp had flown into the military officer's wide-open mouth and stabbed the tip of his tongue. The tip of the tongue was very close to the brain, and the poison spread very quickly in this part of the military officer's body. The hall fell into a dead silence. Suddenly, a plume of dark smoke rose from the ground, and Wu Qi walked out of it with a frown on his face. When she saw that Wu Qi had come alone, Princess Zhang hurriedly came up to him and explained the situation to him in a low voice. One after another, the higher-ups of East Sea bowed to Wu Qi. Their brows were knitted tightly, as they could not think of any solution to the situation. The silver needle pierced into the soldier's body and gently twisted it. When Princess Zhang pulled it out, it was already covered with a faint layer of mist that was intertwined with black and gray. She put the needle under her nose and sniffed it carefully, causing Princess Zhongli's face to turn gloomy. I have to think of a way to reverse the unfavorable situation. Perhaps I should go to outer heavenly realms and recruit a group of itinerant immortals? But I'm not Shen Gongbao in the investiture of the gods, a monster who can make people work for me wholeheartedly just by calling me fellow Taoist. Just as he was worrying, a soldier rushed in and reported loudly, "Report! A cultivator who calls himself Taoist B is at the east gate with 3,000 soldiers, asking for a fight." Wu Qi was so angry that he laughed. "You're just a little gold immortal, and yet you dare to bully me?" With a cold snort, Wu Qi glanced at the higher-ups of East Sea. In the blink of an eye, a large group of people arrived at the East Gate Tower with countless guards, looking down at Taoist B, who was engaged in a fierce battle outside the city. Chapter 952. Treasure, Rise and Fall. A Taoist in a black robe triumphantly held up a seemingly tattered wooden stake with 3 metal rings on it. In front of him lay a general of the East Sea, who was twitching and unable to move, laughing almost madly. The Taoist cultivation base was only a 19th tier heaven immortal, but the general of the East Sea in front of him had the cultivation base of a 1st-star realm of 2nd Panga heaven. As soon as the general of the East Sea joined the battle, the Taoist immediately produced the 3-foot-long wooden stake in his hand, which transformed into a huge dark cloud and soared into the sky, looming over the general of the East Sea. The 3 metal rings emitted an eerie white light, wrapped around the general's head, neck, and waist, and shrunk inwards. That was what happened. Stepping on the head of the general of the East Sea, the old Taoist, who called himself Taoist Three Rings, raised the wooden stake in his hand and laughed. "Is there anyone in the East Sea who dares to fight me? In the vast East Sea, with its great reputation and countless elite soldiers, is there no one who dares to fight me?" Wu Qi's face turned green. This was the first time he had suffered such a setback since he came to Pangu continent. Right under his nose, a dozen itinerant immortals, the strongest of whom was only a 9th-tier gold immortal, and the weakest was only a 25th-tier heaven immortal, had defeated 108 generals of the East Sea in a row, relying on some strange magical treasures, magical techniques, and evil poisons. The 2nd Panga Heaven general who had just been knocked down was Huang Liang's deputy, but he was still vulnerable to the 3-ring Taoist. After a long silence, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "Taoist 3 Rings, release the general of the East Sea, and I'll give you immortal stones and spirit herbs according to the price we offered just now." Laughing strangely, Taoist 3 Rings kicked the general of the East Sea hundreds of feet away, causing him to roll dozens of times on the ground. A few soldiers of the East Sea picked up the general, who was twitching all over, and fled back to Zhendong City with their tails between their legs. After losing 108 battles in a row, the morale of the East Sea County had fallen to 0. If this went on, there was no need for them to fight the Ling dynasty any longer, and they could just admit defeat. With a flick of his hand, Taoist 3 Rings threw a storage bag off the city wall. Complacently, he sucked the bag into his hand, cupped his fist at Wu Qi, and said, "You are indeed generous, King of East Sea. I can't believe you are willing to sacrifice so much for the sake of a defeated general. Hehe, is there any hero in the East Sea who dares to fight me?" Wu Qi pondered for a moment, then waved his hand and hung a huge golden plaque over the city gate. The words "Fight again in 7 days" came into view. Outside the city, Taoist Feng, Taoist 3 Rings, and the other itinerant immortals burst out laughing. With their cultivation base, they had forced all the primordial experts in the city to stay away from the East Sea, and had wounded 108 generals of the East Sea in front of so many primordial experts. They had even forced Wu Qi to hang up the no-fight sign and fight again 7 days later. How great was the merit they had achieved! When Zhang Tingyun really ascended to the throne of the sacred emperor of the human race, with this contribution alone he would surely get a good position in the celestial court. A dozen Taoists were laughing outside the city. That night, they had set up camp outside the city gate. The soldiers of the Ling dynasty had lit up bonfires and roasted all kinds of game they had hunted. The aroma of wine and meat wafted far away, and the sound of laughter made the faces of the soldiers of the East Sea on the city wall turn extremely unsightly. In the great assembly hall, the high-ranking officials of the East Sea looked at each other worriedly. Those Taoists were not very strong, and their cultivation base was not very high. But the magical treasures, mystic arts, and poisons they used were too bizarre, and each of them was a powerful object with a long history. If any of the high-ranking officials of the East Sea present were to strike, they could easily be killed by any one of them. But what would be the consequences if a primordial expert attacked? The consequence was that the primordial experts of the Ling dynasty would retaliate without any scruples. It was like two nuclear powers on Earth throwing nuclear warheads at each other, and in the end, they would all be finished together. The cultivation base of the soldiers on both sides was above the level of heaven immortals, and the limit they could withstand was a fight between gold immortals. The energy ripples emitted when two gold immortals fought each other were not something the soldiers could withstand. If it were a battle between primordial immortals, it was possible that the soldiers of both sides would be wiped out with just a single exchange of blows. That was not an outcome that anyone wanted. So, even though there were so many primordial experts in the East Sea, the gate was blocked by a dozen gold immortals and heaven immortals. Sitting on the throne, Wu Qi was silent for a long time. Then he pulled out the blood centipede sword and wiped it clean. After that, Wu Qi threw the sword to Bai Weiyong, who stood next to Bai Qi and was Bai Qi's proudest great-grandson, Bai Weiyong. The blood centipede sword, an innate spirit artifact, is extremely sharp. Bai Weiyong used it to kill all the Taoists outside the city in 7 days. There was a murderous intent in Wu Qi's words that sent a chill down everyone's spine. Everyone nodded silently. This was the best outcome. Ing Zheng glanced at Wu Qi, then at the high-ranking officials of the East Sea present. Then he slapped his head. Amidst the swirling dark clouds, the cauldron of Yu, the item of virtue he had used in Meng Mountains, flew out. Ing Zheng handed the cauldron of Yu to his grandson, Ing Zishan, the youngest son of Fu Su, the crown prince of Great Qin, and said, "Take this cauldron. 7 days from now, you'll represent Great Qin in the battle." One after another, the high-ranking officials of the 6 states handed their personal treasures to their juniors. The fact that Wu Qi had given the blood centipede sword to Bai Weiyong showed Wu Qi's attitude. With Wu Qi's current status, it was impossible for him to take back what he had given away. In other words, this innate spirit artifact was given to Bai Weiyong. He wanted a great victory at all costs. Since Wu Qi had put in so much effort, what else could the others say? If they watched the East Sea be defeated, not only would the interests of the 6 states suffer a great loss, they would also lose face. The great hall was filled with dazzling lights. The emperors and ministers of the 6 states had brought out all their treasures. But there were only about 100 emperors and ministers of the 6 states with extraordinary treasures, which could only equip about 100 juniors. The outcome of the battle in 7 days was still unknown, and it was a little difficult for them to resist the Ling dynasty with just 100 extraordinary treasures. Wu Qi tapped lightly on the table in front of him. After pondering for a long time, he nodded slowly and said, "Let's hold on for a while. I'll think of a way to solve this problem. In front of us, the people of the Ling dynasty cannot be complacent." The people exchanged a glance and nodded slowly at the same time. Just then, a beam of golden light descended from the sky, suddenly piercing through the layers of restrictive spells in East Suppression City and falling straight in front of the assembly hall. A deep voice rang out, "What troubles do you have? Can you tell me? I'm Reverend Flysoul, an itinerant cultivator from Mount Jiuyao. Now, following the will of heaven, I've come to seek refuge in the East Sea and wipe out the heaven-defying Ling dynasty." Everyone was taken aback, and Chi-Chi turned to look at the entrance of the hall. A Taoist, who was 10 feet tall and 6 feet wide on his shoulders, was standing in front of the main hall. His entire body was covered with bulging muscles, and his skin was pitch black like an iron ingot. He carried 2 huge iron hammers on his back, and 8 lines of blood-red talismans were stuck on the surface of the black hammers. An immense murderous aura was constantly emanating from the hammers, causing the hearts of all the people in the main hall to skip a beat. Ing Zheng sneered and said, "Taoist, are you telling the truth?" "Believe it or not," said Reverend Flysoul in a lukewarm tone. "I'm not here to risk my life for the East Sea. I'm just following the decree of a senior to make things difficult for the Ling dynasty. It's just that it's not convenient for me to find the Ling dynasty directly, so I'm just using the East Sea as a cover." Before his words could fade away, another beam of green light descended from the sky. A skinny Taoist, clad in a long green robe and shrouded in green mist, with his face as green as spinach, landed in front of the hall. He cupped his fist and bowed to Reverend Flysoul in a gloomy manner and said, "Fellow Taoist Flysoul, I didn't expect you to be here as well." Reverend Flysoul gave the green-clothed Taoist a look and said with surprise, "Immortal Ing, I didn't expect you to be on the same side as me." Immortal Ing said in a gloomy manner, "Likewise. I'm here following the decree of a senior to make things difficult for the Ling dynasty, and the East Sea has given us a good excuse." Inside the hall, the higher-ups of the East Sea did not make a sound. The emperors and ministers of the 6 states could not figure out the origins of these 2 people, but Wu Qi revealed a mysterious smile. He and Princess Zhongli looked at each other. Both of them had a feeling that this must be the case. The Holy Alliance formed by the 18 sages would not sit idly by and watch the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League do as they please. They would definitely cause trouble for the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League. Perhaps the 18 sages were plotting how to deal with the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs, but this did not stop them from sending some itinerant immortals who were related to them to make trouble for the Ling dynasty. After all, the 18 sages were supreme beings of the Tao integration stage. Even if they didn't establish their own sects and recruit disciples, they would have formed many relationships over the years. These itinerant immortals must have been indebted to them in the past. Or perhaps, they were simply servants that they had raised to run errands for them. With a bright smile on his face, Wu Qi rose to his feet and courteously greeted the 2 Taoists. "Fellow Taoists, it is my honor to have you help the East Sea so righteously. Someone, set up a banquet. Let's drink to our heart's content and welcome our fellow Taoists." Grabbing Reverend Flysoul and Immortal Ying's hands, Wu Qi dragged them into the hall. At first, Reverend Flysoul and Immortal Ying shook their wrists, trying to shake off Wu Qi's hand. But how could they shake off Wu Qi's strength? He chuckled as he pulled the 2 of them to the main hall and forced them to sit down on their seats. The others had also understood the purpose of Wu Qi's visit. Intentionally or unintentionally, the group of higher-ups unleashed their auras. Reverend Flysoul and Immortal Ying, who were a little haughty just a moment ago, suddenly stiffened. Heavens above, how could there be so many primordial experts in the East Sea? And it was obvious that a few of them were cultivating the immortal magic of the Tao League. Was the East Sea a power of the human race or the Tao League? Reverend Flysoul and Immortal Ying's attitude immediately became much more humble. Smiling, they cupped their fists and greeted Wu Qi, their eyes blinking as they looked around in amazement at the civil and military officials of the East Sea, whose cultivation base was much higher than theirs. Beams of light fell from the sky one after another. In just over 2 hours, nearly 100 odd-looking itinerant immortals had come to the East Sea. These itinerant immortals were originally very arrogant, but after Wu Qi gave them a little show of strength, they all became very humble. After that, Wu Qi deliberately tried to win them over with enthusiasm, and soon, it was a lively scene where the guests and the host were enjoying themselves. 7 days later, a horn rang out outside Jindong City, and the itinerant immortals of the Ling dynasty were ready to fight again. During these 7 days, more than 3,000 itinerant immortals had come to Jindong City to join the army of the East Sea. Although these loose immortals had their own trump cards, not all of them had a magic treasure that they could use easily. Immediately, a Taoist in a crimson robe flew out and shouted sternly, "How dare you kill my best friend? Fellow Taoist three-ring spirit is not far away. Watch me avenge you." The Taoist raised his hands and rubbed them together. A great plume of fire sprayed out like a meteor shower. Countless dazzling red fireballs trailed behind them as they smashed toward Bai Wuyong. Bai Wuyong swung his sword and retreated hastily. The generals of the East Sea had witnessed the means of this red-robed Taoist a few days ago. The flames he sprayed were extremely strange and vicious. Once attached to the body, they would not burn the skin, flesh, and bones, but only hurt the soul and blood essence. 7 days ago, the general of the East Sea who fought with him was accidentally attached to the body of the red-robed Taoist. He was burned from the 3 stars realm of the second Panga heaven to the point of losing his blood essence and falling back 3 major realms to the level of the 6 stars realm. On top of that, after he was possessed by the flame, his soul would be surrounded and burned by it, and he would lose control of his fleshly body, allowing anyone to do whatever they wanted to him. As a result, the general just stood stiffly on the battlefield. Using a shabby flying sword, the Taoist hacked and hacked at the general for a full 2 hours, and finally injured both of the general's eyes. Wu Qi was forced to admit defeat, and the general was rescued and brought back to East Suppression City. If the red-robed Taoist could get his hands on the blood centipede sword, with the strange power of his flames, he could kill his enemy with a single strike. He would not be in such an awkward situation as 7 days ago, when he had to work hard for 2 hours to injure his enemy's eyes, the most vulnerable part of his body. He waved the blood centipede sword and sent out a great sheet of blood-red light, barely blocking the countless fireballs that came at him. The red-robed Taoist's figure flickered like a ghost in the fireballs. Bai Wuyong had no other divine abilities except for his mighty physical strength. He could not even control the blood centipede sword to fight back, so he could only passively fend off the red-robed Taoist's attacks in the fireballs. If he could find the red-robed Taoist's real body, he could kill him with a single strike. But alas, he just could not lock onto the Taoist's erratic figure. Furious, he waved the blood centipede sword and sent out a great sheet of blood-red light to protect himself, lest the fireballs would stick to him. Up on top of the city wall, Ing Zishan, who had inherited Ing Zheng's cauldron, was about to step in and replace Bai Wuyong when Reverend Flysoul, who was standing next to him, cried out, "General, back off now. Let me deal with this red-skinned ox nose." Laughing wildly, Reverend Flysoul leaped down from the city wall with 2 great hammers in hand. With a swing of his hammers, a spirit talisman flew up, rolling up a great plume of black smoke and whistling toward the fireballs that blotted the sky. The black smoke and fireballs collided with each other and produced a series of explosions. The red-robed Taoist was nearly brushed by a plume of black smoke, and the jarring ghost howls coming from it shook his divine soul, nearly making him fall to the ground. Bai Wuyong seized the opportunity to return to the top of the city wall. He cupped his fist and bowed to Wu Qi. Wu Qi nodded approvingly at him, then focused all his attention on the fight between Reverend Flysoul and the red-robed Taoist. Bai Wuyong was forced to retreat by the red-robed Taoist's magic, which reminded Wu Qi of the biggest shortcoming of the generals of the East Sea. The cultivation techniques of the human race could only make the soldiers of the human race possess extraordinary strength and strong fleshly bodies, but they could not cultivate any divine abilities or magical powers. If an immortal was approached by a human general, the immortal would be dead for sure, but if the distance between the human general and the immortal was increased, the human general would be in danger of losing his life. All the generals of Dayu would fuse with all kinds of powerful beast souls, using them to enhance their strength, and at the same time, possess all kinds of divine abilities they had when they were alive. The cultivation base of the generals of the East Sea was very good at the moment, but their beast souls were lacking. As for the generals of the East Sea who had cultivated to the realm of second Panga heaven, they would not fuse with the beast soul of a wind-breaking wolf like Yen Bugue did, would they? That would be too shabby, and they would not take the experts of Gold Immortal realm seriously. He had to find a way to find a group of powerful beast souls. Wu Qi frowned and looked at Ao Buzan. This guy was used to being ruthless. Would he mind using the souls of his children as the beast souls of the generals of the East Sea? Would he mind? Probably not, but Wu Qi could not bring himself to do it. Just as he was thinking about this, a miserable howl rang out, and the red-robed Taoist was smashed to pieces by Reverend Fleisal's hammer. The fireball shot out by the red-robed Taoist was blocked by the dark mist that rose from Reverend Fleisal's hammer and could not get close to him at all. Reverend Fleisal, on the other hand, was skilled in illusions. With a few flashes of his body, he created a few illusions to attract the attention of the red-robed Taoist, while his true form appeared behind him and smashed down with the hammer. After winning 2 rounds in a row, Reverend Fleisal triumphantly swung his hammer at the itinerant immortals of the Ling dynasty, then spun and flew up to the top of the city wall. Surprisingly, one of the itinerant immortals on the other side recognized Reverend Fleisal. The old Taoist with an ancient face looked over and snapped, "Reverend Fleisal, you are a man who has truly transcended the worldly affairs, enjoying the peace and quiet like a wild crane. Why did you come to this muddy water? You are from the Tao League, and even if you want to enter the worldly affairs to accumulate virtues, you should choose the Ling dynasty. Why did you go to the enemy of the Tao League?" Reverend Fleisal was taken aback. He shook his head and shouted at the group of itinerant immortals on the side of the Ling dynasty, "Your father is from the Tao League, your mother is from the Tao League, and your whole family is from the Tao League. I'm, old Taoist? Lao Tzu is not from the Tao League. Lao Tzu has another master, and he has nothing to do with the Tao League. Don't try to curry favor with me." Wu Qi gave Reverend Fleisal a look, smiled, then turned to the itinerant immortals and asked, "Which senior immortal is willing to make a new contribution to the East Sea?" Immortal Ing chuckled evilly, then transformed into a green ghost flame and slowly drifted down the city wall. A quarter of an hour later, Immortal Ing had used some unknown evil magic, which made the bodies of 3 itinerant immortals on the other side fester and kill them on the spot. After that, more and more itinerant immortals from the East Sea went out to challenge the Ling dynasty. Some of them won, some were defeated, and some were killed. However, over the past few days, there were over 3,000 itinerant immortals in Jindong City, while there were only about 200 outside the city. After a day of fierce fighting, only 7 or 8 of the itinerant immortals from the Ling dynasty were left alive. Seeing that the situation was hopeless, the general of the Ling dynasty army gave the order to retreat. The army of 1 million, together with the remaining itinerant immortals, retreated to the east in a sorry state. Drums and trumpets rang out in Jindong City. The army of the East Sea, which had retreated thousands of miles to the west a few days ago, set out once again. 3,000 itinerant immortals were divided into more than 100 groups, continuing to attack the Ling dynasty together with the army. This time, the generals of the East Sea army were given all kinds of magical treasures by Wu Qi and the others. So, even if they ran into those itinerant immortals, they would not be helpless against them. Naturally, the upper echelons of the East Sea would be responsible for planning the march and the war. Meanwhile, Wu Qi stood on top of the city wall, looking at the army leaving in the distance with other thoughts swirling in his mind. The itinerant immortals of the Tao League could join the Ling dynasty in the war. The itinerant immortals of the Saint League could also join the war in the East Sea. Those lofty existences of the Tao-fusing realm had racked their brains and used various means to fight and kill on Pangu continent. Why did he have to follow their steps? Why did he have to act according to their plans? The Wahuang clan, the Yellow Emperor Xinyuan, the Yen Emperor Shenong, and the others had all fallen into the trap of the Tao League and Buddhist League. Emperor Haozuan, the Emperor of Nuyu, Zhang Tingyun, and the others were fighting hard according to the rules set by the Tao League and Buddhist League. But he had a chance to jump out of the various plans of the Tao League and Buddhist League. What could be more heaven-defying than the scroll of stealing? After pondering for a moment, Wu Qi suddenly smiled. Both the Buddhist League and the Tao League were now eyeing the throne of the human emperor, and he had chosen Great Wu to intervene. But Great Wu's strength was limited, and even Wu Qi himself was not sure if he could succeed. Perhaps he could do something else. After all, he could not let the Tao League and the Buddhist League live so comfortably. At last, Wu Qi turned to Princess Zhonglu and said with a smile, "It's not fun to be used as a chess piece. Tell me, if I swallowed one of their big flags in advance, would some people go crazy? Would they reveal a loophole?" Princess Zhonglu looked at Wu Qi in surprise and asked, "What do you want to do?" Wu Qi licked his lips and said in a low voice, "Nothing, I just want to kill the Emperor of New Yu in advance." Chapter 954. While the war on the East Sea was raging, Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu had secretly left the East Sea and sneaked to the back of Pangu continent. In the primordial world between the front and the back of Pangu continent, the 9 blood-draining celestial fiends had constructed a huge fiend-slaying sword formation with themselves as the eye of the formation and the 36,000 Kunwu swords that Wu Qi had condensed with primal purple energy. Amidst the vast sword formation, 1.08 billion fist-sized purple balls of light floated slowly. They were the stars condensed from the great Tao Wu Qi obtained from the kaleidoscopic star core. To construct the formation, Wu Qi had exhausted all his magic power, and it took him 7 days and 7 nights of meditation with the help of Princess Zhonglu to recover all his energy. After leaving the heaven-refining cauldron in the core of the formation, where it kept absorbing natural energy to supply the formation, Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu flew to the back of Pangu continent, heading in the direction of Great Horns's origin tree of fire. Wu Qi wanted to kill the Emperor of New Yu and seize the Emperor Aura that he had obtained by splitting the Yu. Wu Qi had tried it before. The Emperor Aura was similar to the willpower of the Buddhist League, a power of faith generated by the respect and worship of the Emperor of hundreds of millions of people. He had once tried to steal a wisp of Emperor Aura from Wu Tianming and condense it into a new one with primal purple energy. He had succeeded in stealing the Emperor Aura, but when he tried to fuse it with primal purple energy and transform it into Emperor Aura, Wu Qi failed. Under the impact of the primal purple energy, the Emperor Aura dissipated like dew under the sun, and Wu Qi did not even have time to react. And the wisp of Emperor Aura nearly shook Wu Tianming's foundation of the human emperor, causing the Emperor Aura in him to nearly dissipate. Wu Qi dared not to take the risk, so he had to give up for the time being. However, Wu Qi had an intuition that if he was given enough Renhuang Qi, he would definitely be able to decipher its secrets. With enough Emperor energy, Wu Qi could not kill Emperor Haozuan, and from a sentimental point of view, Wu Qi would not attack him. But it was the Emperor of New Yu's duty to kill him. As a subject of Yu, it was Wu Qi's duty to kill traitors. Half of the Renhuang aura of the orthodox Renhuang was enough for Wu Qi to figure out how this thing was formed and how to simulate it with the primordial violet Qi. Both Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu had the cultivation base of Tao-breaking realm, which allowed them to fly extremely fast. Pangu continent had expanded greatly these days, and the nearby terrain had undergone great changes. It had taken Wu Qi a month to find Great Horn's lair with Princess Zhonglu. Seeing the huge origin tree of fire towering between heaven and earth from a distance, Wu Qi nodded to Princess Zhonglu. Princess Zhonglu gave Wu Qi a slightly worried look, then threw herself at him, hugged him tightly, and bit him hard on the lips. "Be careful." Wu Qi nodded and said, "Don't worry, Great Horns is a straightforward man. At most, he will beat me up. He won't kill me, his savior. Just stay here and wait for me. If something goes wrong, we'll teleport into the formation. At worst, we'll just have to destroy the 9 blood-draining celestial fiends, and we'll be able to leave at will." Princess Zhonglu nodded her head seriously. From under her sleeve, she took out an altar piece together with the skulls of immortal beasts, various strange magical items, candles, and swords, and began to prepare a set of spells with the most powerful power she knew. The curse was similar to the cosmic constellation restrictive magic Huhai had cultivated in the past. It could connect the many earth veins on Pangu continent into the altar, and use their power to launch an attack. If the cursed dared to resist, a careless mistake would cause a great geological disaster to befall Pangu continent. At that time, calamities would befall the world, and even the almighty experts of the Tao-fusing realm would not dare to bear such a huge amount of karma. When Princess Zhonglu was ready, Wu Qi transformed into the old man Yuan Ling in his previous life. Stepping on a cloud of Yuan Ling's energy, he drifted toward the origin tree of fire. The Sphinx was yawning on a branch of the incomparably huge origin tree of fire. There was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. Clearly, he had just had a good meal, but it was unknown whether his food was divine beasts or some unlucky immortals. Under the tree, Great Horns was frowning and stroking the big hole that the divine tree had made in the war. That day, the Taoist had grabbed Yao Ling with his divine ability and smashed her heavily on the tree, creating a huge pit 1,000 feet in circumference and hundreds of feet deep, causing the tree to lose a lot of energy. Later on, Wu Qi stole a huge amount of energy essence from the origin tree of fire, which severely damaged the tree's vitality. Now, its gleam was a little dim. Great Horns did not know what Wu Qi had done, and he blamed the Taoist for all the crimes. As he stroked the damaged part of the tree, he cursed all the Taoist's relatives. Chaos Fiend gods did not have parents or elders, but Great Horns did not care about that. He had cursed the Taoist's parents, his grandparents, and 18 generations of his ancestors over and over again, uttering all kinds of obscenities that were comparable to the words of 1,000 hooligans in the marketplace. Wu Qi was speechless as he listened to Great Horns' curses from a distance. Great Horns, who was once so simple and simple-minded, was now not only a supreme existence in the realm of Tao fusing, but even his verbal skills had become so terrifying. Wu Qi vaguely remembered that when Great Horns cursed people, he only knew how to use the 3-character sutra. But now, he was able to come up with all kinds of fantastic words, which made Wu Qi feel ashamed of his inferiority. Wu Qi sighed with emotion, then stepped on a green cloud and flew forward. All his attention was focused on the tree's injury, so Great Horns did not notice Wu Qi's approach. The lion man was lying on a branch digesting the delicacy he had just eaten, so he did not notice Wu Qi's presence either. But the dozens of red-robed Taoists sitting cross-legged under the tree and cultivating by the sea of lava opened their eyes at the same time. The oldest among them, an old Taoist with a tuft of white hair carefully tied into a bun the size of a jujube, pointed a finger at Wu Qi and snapped, "Who are you, evildoer? How dare you come here to court death?" About 100 miles away from the origin tree of fire, Wu Qi halted the cloud with a smile on his face. He had not seen these red-robed Taoists the last time he came here. Judging by their cultivation base, the bald old Taoist was a 3rd-tier primordial expert, while the other half of them were at the level of primordial expert. The remaining half of them, more than 30 people, were at the level of peak-level gold immortals, the kind of people who could step into the realm of primordial at any time. It seemed that these were the proud disciples that Great Horns had collected over the years. Although Great Horns did not establish a sect and recruit disciples, he did not live in a vacuum. He would always have some interactions with others. Perhaps, when he was wandering in the world, he would instruct a few itinerant cultivators and save a few fated people. These people could be considered as his in-name disciples. Now, facing the pressure from Tao League and Buddhist League, it was very likely that Great Horns had gathered them together, taught them the great Tao, and even forcibly improved their cultivation base and magic power. The bald Taoist cried out. Great Horns turned around with a gloomy face and snapped, "What are you shouting about? What's the big deal about making a fuss about nothing? So what if someone came here by mistake? If they are good people, let them leave, and if they are not, let your senior brother eat them. What are you shouting about? What are you shouting about?" Without giving Wu Qi a glance, Great Horns pointed at the red-robed Taoists and scolded them, "You'd better learn more from Lao Tzu. Learn what it means to be steady, what it means to be mature, and what it means to... Damn it." While he was lecturing the Taoists to be mature, steady, calm in the face of danger, and have the demeanor of a great general, Great Horns suddenly glanced at Wu Qi. His body shuddered, and after a curse, he was already in front of Wu Qi, kicking hard at Wu Qi's waist. Wu Qi laughed wildly. Following the Chaos Fiend god's usual fighting style, Wu Qi also kicked his foot at Great Horns. A loud boom rang out. Wu Qi's calf was broken into 3 parts, and he staggered back a long distance. After taking a deep breath, a clear stream of energy circulated through his body, and the broken bones were healed at an incredible speed. Great Horns, on the other hand, gave a muffled grunt and stood still. Gritting his teeth, he stared at Wu Qi, then subconsciously reached out to touch the pair of horns on his head of different lengths and said, "Yuan Ling, you damned old monster. Why are you still calling me Lao Tzu's horn?" Wu Qi glared at him, then pointed a finger at Great Horns and snapped, "Bullshit. It's just a horn. What about the fact that I've saved your life?" Great Horns was taken aback. He blinked and recalled how he had lost his horn years ago. After blinking his eyes quickly for a while, he bowed deeply to Wu Qi with a solemn face and bent his body almost 90 degrees. "You're right, old monster. If you hadn't saved me back then, my soul would have perished long ago, and I wouldn't have achieved the Tao fusing realm today. Come to think of it, you are my great benefactor." He straightened up and patted his chest, then glared at Wu Qi and shouted, "Lao Tzu has always been a man who distinguishes between kindness and hatred. You've done Lao Tzu a great favor, so you're Lao Tzu's distinguished guest. When he comes to visit in the future, he'll naturally treat you with good tea and wine. But you've chopped off one of Lao Tzu's horns, so every time you come to visit, Lao Tzu will give you a kick. Ha, you're going to suffer a little." Wu Qi's face twitched. This guy still hasn't lost his nature, and he's still as straightforward as ever. Before Wu Qi could speak, Great Horns suddenly roared and leaped back tens of miles. "Damn it," he shouted, pointing a finger at Wu Qi and shouting, "Didn't you get into a conflict with those ox-nosed bald donkeys and the thugs they colluded with at that time when you went to explore that ancient sacred palace? Didn't you get killed by them? Why are you still alive and kicking?" Rubbing his nose, Wu Qi said with a wry smile, "It's a long story." Great Horns was taken aback. Frowning, he picked his nose and nodded vigorously. "All right, tell me in detail. Lion Face, get the hell out of here for Lao Tzu. Go to that old thieving monkey and ask him for a few jars of good wine. Tell him that if he doesn't give Lao Tzu the best wine, Lao Tzu will set fire to his monkey mountain again, and let his children and grandchildren have nothing left." With his arms around Great Horn's shoulders, Wu Qi and Great Horns flew to the origin tree of fire and sat down. Great Horns introduced Wu Qi's background to his disciples, boasting about Wu Qi to the top, such as the #1 alchemist among chaos fiend gods, the #1 artifact master, the #1 eccentric temperament, the #1 ruthless, the #1 thick skin, and so on. After talking for a long time, Wu Qi finally could not stand Great Horns' spitting. He stamped his foot and asked in a deep voice, "Cut the crap. I'm going to kill the Emperor of New Yu, and you have to help me conceal the heaven secret." Great Horns was taken aback, but then his eyes burst with a strong green light as he grabbed Wu Qi excitedly. "You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.